Raise a glass to freedom, something they can never take away, no matter what they tell you.
Let's raise another glass tonight.
Raise a glass to the four of us, including Phil.
Tomorrow there'll be more of us.
Raising the story of tonight.
Let's raise another glass tonight.
Raise a glass to bunnies, something that is cute in every way. It's what I tell you. Raise a glass to Kana, who's yelling every step of the way when we debate the Disney. Hello, everybody. I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of ghost buns, and today is special. Today is the 100th episode of the Disney debate. Woo! 100th episode. 100. It's crazy. I didn't think we'd get this far. But we're going to talk about that in a second. First of all, we are joined once again by Kat McBerry. How's it going, Kat?
My name is Kat Mac. I am a poet, except not really, but I'm a YouTuber, so there's that. I'm doing great. I've been so excited for this. I was so happy when you suggested it. Like, I can talk for hours, and I know we don't want to because it's hot as balls right now, but... oh, man, I've been looking forward to this big time. So excited.
Let's just say the world turned upside down with the weather right now. Doug, how's it going?
They say the price of Zen's buns aren't a price that they're willing to pay. You cry in the streams of Danganronpa, and hey, when's the next One Piece? By the by. I'm doing okay. How are you, Zen?
I am doing fantastic because I'm not throwing away my shot. Take it away, Kat.
Yo, she's young, scrappy, and hungry, and yeah.
In any case, it's very rare for anything I've done to hit 50, let alone 100. 100's a crazy amount for me. That so many episodes, so many things that we've worked hard to do. And I was just thinking, like, you know, let's do something special. And we all decided on Hamilton. And God, there's a lot to talk about tonight. So before we even get down to brass taxes, first thing I want to say, we all love Hamilton. So a lot of the things that we say, despite that, you know, this is coming from a place of love. We are all theater nerds here.
Big time.
I am not musically inclined, but I love musicals. So, like, I tend to sing all the time. So it's like, it's one of those things. And, you know, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today. This is going to be a long episode. It's going to be split into acts. And the first act is going to be more history-focused as we go in and talk about Hamilton. But for those of you who are scratching your heads and being like, hey, Zen, what you talking about? Like, what the hell's Hamilton? I don't know nothing about your history. I saw your Johnny Tremaine episode. It was awful. It was the worst thing ever.
And yet it has the most views, so...
Yet it has the most views. I'm hoping that Hamilton will usurp that, because Hamilton's really popular. But, so for those of you who don't know, Hamilton was a play performed in 2015, written, directed, composed, and a lot of other things
starring
by Lin-Manuel Miranda. Starred in Lin-Manuel Miranda. And now this kind of started life, from what I understand, as a concept album and grew into a play. And then later in 2020, this play was picked up in recorded form by Disney and is now available on Disney Plus, as Lin-Manuel became one of the main composers for the new Disney era. So it is on Disney Plus as a film, in Letterboxd is considered a film, so technically it is a Disney film, even though it is technically not a film or created by Disney. It's very weird.
Yet half
but
the
it's
cast ends up in Disney products.
half the cast are now in Disney. Like Lin-Manuel is now like their big Disney composer, actor, stuff like that. I just want to start
does a
off
lot with Disney.
Yeah, Lim does so much with Disney right now. I do want to start with like the fact that the miracle that got it to be a Disney film. It took this long, but like it is now officially a Disney film. And it's interesting for me because we recently reviewed Babes in Toyland, and that was a disaster. This is Disney decided, we're not going to make our own. We're just going to purchase the rights to this play that is world renowned and put it on there. And I think this was a great idea just because like I feel production rights for plays are so mistreated, and the fact that like yes, Broadway wants you to get out there and support the arts, and I want to go see plays, but I don't have hundreds of dollars for a play ticket anymore. I went to see Wicked when it first came out in its original Broadway run. I went to see a few other plays, but it's starting to get very expensive, and having old play recordings available to just watch for free. I mean, well, technically not free, you need a Disney Plus account, but having that available with a subscription would be supremely amazing for the arts, and just having this available in any form is amazing. Would you agree, Kat?
Oh yeah, I was so happy when they finally premiered it on Disney Plus, because I'll be honest, as much as I wanted to see the play, I didn't think I'd ever get a chance to. I mean, I still, to this day, haven't seen an actual live performance, but considering how the first, few years was completely sold out, it was, like, nigh impossible. Like, if you got tickets to seeing Hamilton when it first premiered, you were lucky. Like, big time lucky. And so I figured, well, eventually, maybe after 10 years or something, I'll be able to see it. But then, of course, they decided to actually film the play and put it on Disney Plus. And during the perfect time, too, during the peak of COVID, which honestly, I think that was done on purpose, because let's face it, we were at an all-time low at that point. We had no faith in our country. We were like, desperate for material to watch, and this, I felt, came at the perfect time, and it kind of basically tripled its fan base. But I was so happy to finally see it, and like we literally bought the album the next day and just listened to it on repeat. Like that's how freaking catchy this play is.
I watched this in 2020 when it premiered with a bunch of my roommates, and it took a couple viewings because this is a long play. It is nearly 3 hours, I want to say, and it's one of the higher length plays that I've seen, but it's still fantastic. And in 2 days we watched it and we had a blast. We started quoting it. We started like looking things up on YouTube, and it reignited like my passion for the theater. And that's why I think more plays should be viewable like this. Rent, Wicked, Les Mis, having more official releases of Broadway plays out there would be great, because I've only experienced Les Mis through the original Broadway YouTube musical stuff. So like just having a full play available is great to me. Doug.
I was so glad they did this. Like you said, just to pay alone for a Broadway show is outrageously expensive, unless you get the lottery, and even then that's a real crapshoot. And of course, finding the time to go into the city, especially if you're not in the greater metropolitan area and you need to like basically stay a night or something, it can get mad expensive. So I was so glad to hear that they had recorded this back in 2016, and then Disney dropping it on the 4th of July. I know they had initially planned to release it later, but when the pandemic happened, they just strategically moved the date to earlier. And that was just the greatest strategic planning on Disney's part. Just came out at the perfect time. Everybody's, home. They can watch it, do something for to celebrate 4th of July. I know we all got together, and watched it. And yeah, I mean, it definitely, it's like one of those things you need to see multiple times to grasp everything that happens. And then, yeah, like Kat said, we went out and got the album essentially like the next day. And we're still listening to it. Just love the hell out of it.
It is currently my favorite play, and that used to be Wicked, and Wicked is still fantastic, but like this is, I think, even better put together, and we're going to talk about that more when we get to the second act. Now let's talk a little bit more about what this is. So Hamilton is a reimagining of history during the Revolutionary War. It isn't entirely accurate, which makes sense for Disney. And to be fair, a lot of plays are reimaginings of historical events. This isn't the first time this has happened for a play. This isn't the first time it happened for Disney. I mean, it happened... They did it with Johnny Tremaine. We've seen it with Liberty's Kids and a few other things. Reimagining of history happens all the time.
It's 1776.
1776. The difference here is Hamilton is so well put together, it's astonishing. But the other thing is the thing that many people either were indifferent to, up in arms about, or just really dug. This is a nearly full cast of people of color, and it's reimagined to have all the main players be people of color, talk about race, talk about freeing slaves. A lot of the songs have hip-hop, R&B, other such influences. This is meant to appeal to a different demographic, with the only person who is directly white being King George. So, this is the big elephant in the room for some people, and I'm going to state on the record that, I've talked to several people, that I know of, and granted, I'm white, but I am an Irish and Italian daughter of immigrants, so this is kind of about immigration as well, as because Hamilton grew up in the Caribbean and immigrated here. It is about an immigrant.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
Yep. And I've talked to people of color, and like most of the people who I've talked to don't really figure that it's a problem that they recast people of color. The big thing that some people, and not the people I've talked to, but some people bring up is that the recasting people who owned slaves as people of color might be iffy. But this is a thing for me where I'm just like, okay, this isn't the first time things have been recast with people of color. We're going to talk about drunk history in a little bit, but I mean, they recast George Washington as a person of color, and it didn't change anything. Like, obviously, it is a little bit iffy having slave owners be portrayed by people of color, but it could, in theory, empower people of color in a specific way, and I've heard that from some people. Another thing to bring up in that regard is that it doesn't really matter to the story. They're using it as a medium. And while they don't bring up all of the darker subject matter of like the actual historical figures, this doesn't glorify them. It tells them in a different light. And even then it talks about like going against slavery. And I don't know. I think it's a non-controversy myself, Kat.
I mean, like, I've tried listening to people who don't like it for that reason, but it's hard to overlook, the fact that they're basically complaining because they're white people and they're trying to find a reason to feel persecuted and be warranted for it. Where it's like, dude, you have all these other plays and stories and movies that feature white people in the role of the Revolutionary Fathers, and I guarantee you can't name a single play or movie or show because it was just done so generically. Because let's face it, like, in high school, did you pay the slightest bit of attention to history class, specifically during the Revolutionary War period? No, you didn't.
I did, but like there are certain things that just went over my head.
Like, obviously, like big things, like, signing the Declaration of Independence and others, and big battles and stuff like that. But for the most part, nobody really cares about the finer details. So with this play, making it people of color, making the music more R&B, hip hop, rap style, it's supposed to appeal to everybody, not just the strictly white demographic. Because you can do this, but the way it's canonically supposed to be, but it wouldn't be near as interesting. And the thing is, they try to reach a middle ground, because if you notice the costumes, a lot of them are very period accurate. Like, from what I heard, all the costumes from the neck down are all period accurate. It's just the hairstyles are modern. That's it. And, the history is still there. Like, yes, there's a few, misconceptions, elaborations and stuff, but for the most part, it is history. You're seeing history played out, for the most part, how it happened. The fact that it just happened, that most of the cast just happened to be people of color, again, that's to appeal to everybody. It's not just a gimmick or anything like that. And the fact that some people just take such issue with it, it's actually kind of funny. Because it's like, like, these are the same people that say that certain superheroes should either not be played by people of color, or they shouldn't be played by certain genders and stuff. It's like, as long as it's the same character, why does it matter? As long as the writing is good, why does it matter?
Like, I love Miles. Miles Morales is my favorite Spider-Man, and it's not like, they made him into his own character, and they did stuff that's new with it. And the thing that really brings that together here is, like, this play, this Revolutionary War, is all about immigrants who are being oppressed by tyrants, dealing with class issues, race issues. There's a lot of stuff there. Being played by people of color just enhances that. Now, there were also black slave owners back in the day, so like the issue that when I think about it, it's like it's really not as big of an issue to me as others might bring up. But even still, yes, they condense things down. Yes, they change some events. Yes, they embellish, and some things may feel a little bit fanficky, but at the same time, these things are thematically, like, brought together in such a way that it is so much more interesting than any history class, than any history movie that I've ever seen. The only thing that came close was The Patriot, but then that's Mel Gibson.
Yeah, we don't count that anymore.
We don't count that anymore after he went insane. But, like, I feel like if you can make history interesting, there's some merit in that. There is absolutely so much merit. And that's why, like, I rag so much on Johnny Train. Yes, it is our history, but it's so boring. You be interesting. Be more interesting, damn it. That's all I'm asking. That's all we were really asking for in that episode. Is that, we don't want to Liberty's kids telling where it just dumbs things down for toddlers. And this deals with some of the more darker aspects that we're going to talk about here. I don't think it's the type of thing that people write it off as. Like, some people write it off as, oh, it's just, they're not talking about everything that's accurate. They're not talking about, like, certain really dark things about Thomas Jefferson. I'm like, Thomas Jefferson is just one person involved in this. He's not the sole person. So, like, I feel like people don't give it its due. Doug?
So I think I'm paraphrasing Lin-Manuel Miranda here when I say, This is a story of America then portrayed by America now.
Okay.
Yeah, basically what that stems to is look how much more diverse the main demographic of America is now. So it doesn't really even matter, especially because there's a lot of colorblind casting in theater. Hell, when I did in college, I did a production of Chekhov's Three Sisters. Two of the sisters were white, and one of them was played by a black woman. So obviously, people had their critiques of that, but what does it matter? They're still playing the parts. As long as, they're doing a convincing job, then why I don't see any reason to complain. And then there's also the fact that this is a story serviced by the music. And to be clear, the music of today, which is a lot of hip hop and rap, and who best to, perform that style than, blacks, Latinas, the primary demographic. And of course, there's also, like I said, there's a push for diversity because, a lot of minorities, they weren't seeing themselves in, these movies, these, Broadway shows. So it's nice to have a push where we can cast more than just the white people again. And I know there's, been some backlash from some. It's like, oh, you're in theater, you should be able to play anything. But really, white people have been the majority for so long, we overlook some, potentially good actors in the minority. And it's nice that we can finally shine a light on them, get more of them cast in things, and, get it more diverse in casting. So I think
especially because
this is important.
This is important. And the last time I remember really seeing people of color like mainstays in a play was West Side Story. And that is a classic, but like that was made a while back. So it's like we need to shine a light on diversity. We need to try to talk about things through our perspective. The play is a lot about perspectives and how we view things and how our stories are told. So I think it works. The message of revolution is universal and still fitting today, but it's even more fitting for immigrants, for people of color, for women, for the central figures of this play. And I think that's important. Now, it does bring up a lot of the darker stuff of like Thomas Jefferson. He owns slaves, and they do bring that up. They do bring a lot of that stuff up. They don't bring up everything, but like I hesitate to say that these are morally good people because it's a gray play. It's morally gray, and that's talking about how good intentions can lead you down the wrong path. So in this state, I just think that like a lot of these big backlashes just to putting out this cast is very stupid. In a lot of ways, there is some merit, but like for the most part, it stems from a place of either ignorance or misunderstanding. And the best way I got to describe it, and I know this is not entirely accurate, but a lot of the people who like diss on Hamilton remind me of how like I saw an episode of Bob's Burgers. It's called Topsy, and the summation of this episode is that one of the teachers of Luis's class is very into Thomas Edison, like supremely into Thomas Edison, and wants to fail Louise because like she wants to tell the truth about how Thomas Edison's a bad person, killed an elephant, there's an elephant in the room right there. but like the whole time, like this teacher is so blinded, so much of a history geek, that in order to get the good favor back, they have to make this whole play about how Thomas Edison was good and that the elephant was actually treated well, and it's
they had
like
a romance apparently.
they had a romance. It's a very catchy musical about a morbid subject. I'm Edison, Thomas Edison, the man who'll get us into history. Like it's a really great episode. But the only reason I bring this up is that I feel like, while it's not fully relevant because of the way they portray things, especially because Thomas Edison is universally derided as a bad person, it's that I feel most people, when they're bashing on Hamilton, view it in the same way that this person, like the lens of this episode takes, where like, oh, and Lin-Manuel is just this history geek. He's so into this one person, he can't see the facts. And like, I'm not trying to bash on Quentin reviews, but this is one of the biggest examples that I took of. I like Quentin Reviews' main like work. I've seen a lot of his stuff, great work. But when it came to his episode on Hamilton, he got things wrong in certain ways that it feels like it was purposefully mistreating the subject matter. To like, one of the points was like, oh, it's Hamilton is edgy for the Tumblr crowd, and it's not a good documentary, and it's because it leaves out the fact that Thomas Jefferson was married to someone who was very underage. It's very bad. And I'm like, I think you're missing the point. I think you're definitely missing the point, Kat.
Yeah, look, it really doesn't make sense to me how some people are saying, like, it glosses over the bad points of history or the bad points of the characters, because I'm like, every single character is flawed. It's not like they conveniently cover up the bad stuff they did. It's there on the walls. You can look it up online and like read about the true history of these people. Like, nothing is hidden from you. It's not like some big conspiracy or whatever, but people treat it as such, and it's like, come on here. You're not like doing like a deep dive. You're not doing like a big reveal or something. It's like, yes, these were the founding fathers. They did awful stuff. And just because they don't focus that heavily on it in the play isn't necessarily a bad thing or indicating that they're trying to like hide the truth. It's like, if anything, it's more subtle, like a lot of the references. Because again, they do mention that, you know, some of the characters owned slaves, that some of the characters were fighting to abolish slavery. And actually, if you look at the, again, referencing the costumes, if you look at the background ensemble, particularly during the scenes with Thomas Jefferson, they're mostly dressed in white, but they specifically wear black collars. What do you think that's supposed to signify? Mm-hmm. So, it's there, but you gotta look for it is all. Because again, the focus is about the life of Hamilton. That's what we're focusing on here. And we acknowledged all of the bad stuff he did and the flaws, but he also did good things too. And that's what Lin is trying to portray here, you know, that yes, he's the founding father who did questionable stuff, but he also did stuff that basically built the foundation of our nation. So it's like, you gotta acknowledge the good and the bad here, not just focus on the bad.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is like, look, we don't sugarcoat the specific things. Like Aaron Burr had an affair. He was basically bonking a British soldier's wife. They make no qualms about that. Hamilton did the same thing. And it's told from the perspective of Hamilton, but you see anyone else in the play look at him like he's awful for it. Like, they don't sugarcoat that. And they don't sugarcoat the fact that he turns on France after Lafayette helps him. Like, there's a lot of stuff that they don't sugarcoat the details. And I think when Kat brought up a Simpsons episode, it makes more sense. For those who don't know, Simpsons has an episode called Lisa the Iconoclast, where she finds out that one of the founders of Springfield
The
was
founder.
the founder of Springfield was a pirate in disguise. Which, like, if you've seen the Telltale Head beforehand, like, everyone loves the founder so much that when Bart tries to saw off the head of the founder, he gets in so much trouble. But it turns out this person was a pirate. And Lisa finds out, and she tries to, like, showcase the truth, but everyone around's trying to hide the truth. And eventually, when the truth does almost come out, she decides not to show it simply because she sees merit in the myth or lie, because so many people have come together to do good and be happy because of this lie. And I think this is more in line with what Hamilton is about. It's like, it acknowledges the history, it acknowledges that the bad things did happen, but it doesn't want you to dwell on it, because it says, you know, much like A Miracle on 34th Street once said, a lie that brings a smile can be worth more than a truth that sheds a tear. And I think this is the important part. Like, yes, talk about it, but let's revel in the good that came from this one specific event. Doug?
Honestly, yeah, I mean, there is merit in that, you know, what if the founder, despite his flaws, despite the fact that he was actually a bad man, you know, he rallies people together and actually makes them decent in some respect. It's like, yeah, you know, you kind of don't want to lose that. But at the same time, I feel like we really also need to acknowledge that our historical figures, our founding fathers, they were flawed. They were not the nicest. And anybody who keeps harking back on, you know, oh, what would the founding fathers have wanted? The founding fathers were a bunch of slave owners and racists and just
who
not
thought
the
that
nicest people.
the 3/5 compromise was a bad idea.
Yeah.
Like they said a slave was 3/5 of a person, and that's still bad today.
Mm-hmm. Not to say that they did not do good things. You can be a bad person, still do good things. You could be a good person and still do bad things. You know, you just got to acknowledge that people have their flaws. And that, you know, there's the line, you don't want to meet your heroes because they're not necessarily going to live up to the pedestal that you put them on. You know,
God, we've seen that a lot lately,
yeah.
Especially like in YouTuber, VTuber, every community. I've been in this game long enough to know that, like, people will eventually show their true colors, and you shouldn't idolize people in that regard.
Yeah, plus if you want to see what true whitewashing and, like, covering up of history is, look at the school criterias for certain schools in the South. Because I've seen, like, you know, I've seen screenshots and uploads and other things of, like, what they teach some kids, and the lengths they go to just to cover up, like, what the founding fathers did, what, like, a lot of people's ancestors once did is, like, laughable. Like, they won't use the word slaves. They will, whenever they refer to slavery, they will use terms like volunteers or immigrant workers or, you know, volunteer workers or something. Like, they will, like, jump through hoops to acknowledge, just, like, refuse to acknowledge that any of them own slaves in a bad sense. And then, yeah, it's like, it baffles my mind how they think they can get away with this in this day and age where the internet is readily available to everyone. And I know you can't believe everything you read on the internet, but for the most part, looking at the history of slavery is pretty easy to find, and you're gonna find a lot of details on it. The fact that they think children aren't gonna be able to find this, it's again, just so laughable.
And for all those who want to know, there's plenty of places on the internet with sources cited, and don't trust people who don't cite their sources. Always cite your sources, and we've done a lot of research for this episode. Oh my god, so much research. just to get to this point. And it just, there's information out there if you want to learn. And I did, when Quinnen brought up a few things, I did check. And yes, the Schuyler family made their fortune on owning slaves. So there's stuff there. But at the end of the day, I don't think it really factors into what Hamilton is about. So, like, them bringing it up, I don't think would have been relevant. Even though he was against slavery, he's trying to rise up, and the whole first act of this play is about him gaining in status so that he can change things. And, I mean, he's not a saint. He's done some bad things. So, like, I'm just saying that I don't think putting that in would have made it relevant, personally. Final thing that I'm going to bring up, actually, there's two things, because I just want to talk about some Lin-Manuel Miranda stuff that's related to Hamilton, but is not necessarily Hamilton. But he appeared on Drunk History twice, and I think the telling thing here is, one, everyone is cast by someone who is like a person of color or a gender swapped version. I want to say female Hamilton's kind of hot, not gonna lie. Aaron Burr as a woman is great. There's some really great bits there, but the big thing is how, like, he's telling the story and he tells it in a more accurate way. I'm not entirely sure how accurate, because I'm not super history buff, but, like, he goes out of his way to, he's totally drunk. He's on his ass. But, like, he tells, like, how, the real person who brought the Reynolds pamphlet stuff up to Hamilton and stuff like that. And I feel like if he allowed himself to appear on Drunk History to tell a different version of events, it's not him trying to sugarcoat things with this play. I feel like it's like he acknowledges the reality of the situation. He just wanted to tell a story that was more coherent.
Yeah, plus he himself has admitted that, he took liberties in certain spots for the sake of drama. And I mean, who wouldn't? Like, again, this is sort of like a borderline fanfic almost. Yes, it's rooted in history, but there are certain things he obviously jazzed up because he knew would make better for the stage play. And I mean, it's not like it's anything harmful or detrimental or anything. It's like, you can easily look it up and be like, oh yeah, that's not true. But it's not like, he's sending out a bad message or anything. He's not trying to, like, mislead people per se. Like, again, he's admitted to most of his mistakes.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to bring up, Kat showed me this really interesting thing from a show called Curb Your Enthusiasm. I haven't seen it. I've heard of it, obviously, but, like, I haven't actually seen an episode. It's kind of like Seinfeld, but a little bit different. But Lin-Manuel, does a funny enactment of him, like, setting up his play, and he has a really interesting and funny duel with Larry David. It's kind of funny, but I feel like Lin is always keen to let himself be in on a joke. He isn't taking this seriously. He isn't trying to say his portrayal is the only right one. And, I mean, he's done so many things that it makes me feel like he's just having fun with Hamilton, and we should have fun as well. Doug?
I mean, it's Larry David, he's one of the Seinfeld creatives. He basically is the inspiration for George Costanza. So this is basically his world, albeit exaggerated. So everybody is either, everybody who plays themselves is an exaggerated version of themselves. So, I mean, it is fun to see. Obviously we don't really know Lin-Manuel Miranda, outside of whatever interviews or anything we've seen of him. So we're seeing him, portray himself as this kind of asshole, kind of passive aggressive, just Seeing him fighting with Larry David, but then again, Larry David just seems like that kind of person that just instigates all these, fights and just brings out the worst in people. But it is fun, yeah.
Yeah,
but I mean,
remember...
that's the fun of it, though, is that, again, this is an exaggeration of him, and you're seeing him as an asshole, which is something you don't see very often in a lot of cameos and, like, other roles that he's played. And I found it very interesting, too, because I feel like this is the version that naysayers of Hamilton think he is. That, he's a guy who must have creative control, who must have his vision seen, his narrative told, and, he will take advantage and walk over anyone to make it known. So I feel like that was kind of a jab at his naysayers, too. Kind of clever.
Mm-hmm. And I think my favorite bit, like, I didn't like a lot of it, simply because a lot of Larry David's comedy is babbling, and it's like... the first clip that Kat showed me, I'm like, I wasn't even sure we were going to mention it because he's just talking about nothing. He started bringing it up, and I'm just like, I don't know. Like, him falling asleep in Hamilton is funny, but like the lead up is so bad. I'm just like, no. But then when we get to the actual duel with Hamilton and stuff like that, like, their arguments with each other are so petty. Like, it's just like, oh, you tore up the place. You're supposed to tiptoe, ask if you want to use the fridge, play a game of Mahjong. They took my curtain remote. What, the curtain remote? It's a curtain. You open it.
Well, that's part of the genius of his comedy, is that technically the people around him are jerks, and he is in the right to be mad, but he's such a jerk himself, it's hard to sympathize with him. So you end up just rooting against him because of that. But I love how even like it takes cues from the play itself, like the fact that Larry David, like, at one point his pants fall because he wears like this really loose pair of pants, and he accidentally shoots Lin in the mouth. And that was like a line from one of the songs. It's like, yeah, you should have shot him in the mouth. That would have shut him up. And that's exactly what happened. And he even calls Larry David Aaron Burr. And he's like, I'm not Aaron Burr. I'm not.
And then there's friggin' Ron Swanson is mediating the duel.
So appropriate. If only he had bacon.
He needs more bacon. Okay, so... yeah, I know that was a lot of stuff to start us off, a lot of history. We can actually get into the play now, but there was so much to discuss when it comes to how people view this and how people have viewed it over time. I found it very fascinating at how our culture, from 2020 to 2024 have changed about the film. When the film first came out, in 2020, everyone was praising it. Everyone was praising it in 2015 when the play came out. But even then, there was a little bit of naysayers, but now there's a lot more. And, I try to take at least a lot of it with a grain of salt, but I like to look into why people are kind of downsizing or, like, looking down on it after all this time, when it came out and was one of the top plays ever made and probably still is. Because I don't think anything has rivaled its success since. It's one of the biggest things ever made. With that being said, we should talk about the actual play.
Yeah.
Kat, before we do that, anything else to add?
I just want to say that's probably part of the problem of why people have suddenly stopped liking it. I call it the Frozen effect, where something becomes so big, so beloved, so overshown that people become sick of it. So, like, the way everybody, was praising Frozen for its unique storytelling, for its music and stuff, but then, like, less than a year, people were sick of the song Let It Go. Like, nowadays, every parent, like, clenches whenever they hear that song played. I think it's the same with this, too, because, the music is so catchy, I can just imagine so many people just singing random songs from it and eventually getting on people's nerves. Not to mention, Lin-Manuel Miranda at this point is Disney's golden boy, so they're going to try to use him as much as possible, even in situations where his talent isn't necessarily needed or wanted, aka the live action Little Mermaid. So yeah, I think that's part of what attributes to people like now distaste of Hamilton. I still don't think it's warranted because the play itself is still pretty good. It's just I can sort of see the mindset behind something that's so like overshown that it just becomes an annoyance in and of itself.
Doug.
Yeah, I agree with Kat. Especially because given how she worked at Disney and had to deal with Randy Newman ad nauseum at all hours of the day.
Yeah, fun fact, I did an internship at Disney World, and there was about a week where I had to work at Pizza Planet in what is now Disney Hollywood's, and they played the same 3 songs from Toy Story over and over and over, to the point where now I absolutely despise Randy Newman on principle just from hearing his voice so much. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of having a negative association through overexposure.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Like, there are some songs that if you hear too often, it becomes torture.
Yeah.
Like, if I hear the song "You Got a Friend in Me," I clench and I immediately change the song because I just do not want to hear it, like any rendition of it at this point, even if it's not Randy Newman. Like, again, negative association. It sucks because it's a good song and all that, but that's just my PTSD for you.
And let's it's not to mention the culture we have is so bubblegum. It's like something will get big and just be like completely, overblown. You'll hear everybody singing a song, or you go to a convention and you got, a million people dressed as, the character from that. You hear, we don't talk about Bruno on the radio and at the Oscars. Yeah, it gets jarring. I understand that. And then, like, immediately something else comes along and you've forgotten all about, whatever that thing was. So
yeah, I still love Encanto, but it's kind of like, we're going to talk in our second act a little bit more about how people have turned a little bit on Lin-Manuel Miranda these days, but that is part of the factor. Overexposure. If you have him doing everything, even stuff he's not supposed to be doing, that leads to a problem.
Remember the swamp?
Yeah, where we went womp chicka womp womp. We'll talk about that. We won't talk about Bruno, but we'll talk about that. All right, the actual play. So, this was actually interesting to me because when I first saw this, I'm like, wow, this is a very minimalist telling in terms of the set, in terms of the cast, in terms of how it's presented. So, for those who don't know anything about theater, normally a play can, if it's on Broadway, it'll have elaborate sets, elaborate set pieces to kind of put things together and put you in the head of where these characters are. Hamilton does the opposite, where it has a small cast, it has one singular set, but it has a rotating stage where the center rotates one way and can rotate a third way at the same time, allowing for set pieces to come. They bring stuff from offset, but they don't utilize as much. They use the characters to tell the story of where they are, which is unique for me. I've seen plays like this before, but never a big time Broadway play. And it's like, yeah, they have this, staircase coming out on one side. They have this big elaborate staircase and stuff in the background. And some of the background set is really well done with how they work about it. But everything in the foreground is these characters, which is strange because it's a very small cast of characters with many of them playing 2 different parts. And when I first saw this, I thought that it was due to budget or something like that. But Kat explained to me that no, this was done on purpose to thematically showcase the duality of the people in Hamilton's life. And looking back, it's so obvious. And granted, half the time you can't tell because these actors do such a great job. Now, the most obvious is probably Philip, because his son plays another character in the show, and you can immediately tell it's him because he then plays a 9-year-old and then like a teenage son. And it's like, I get why they did it, because you care about him more because it's someone you saw in the first half of the play. It's just that 9-year-old bit. I'm like, he doesn't look 9. He doesn't look 9, Cat.
I get it. Like, it was jarring to me at first when I saw it, but once I realized the theme they were going for, it made more sense. It's like when you see the actor who played Lafayette suddenly comes back as Jefferson, but he's a completely different person, and he's a completely different role in terms of his relation to Hamilton. So it's like, once you see that, and then you see what they do with Philip, it's like, oh, okay, I get it now. This is the narrative we're going for here. These are the beats that we're following.
Yeah.
I said, I won't lie, it is weird, but it's like they're not going to get an actual 9-year-old kid to play, that one bit for that one song. Because nobody's going to associate with him later. I know he's older by 10 years, but it's just easier to have that association when it's the same person throughout. And not to mention, the nightmare it is to work with children in theater and all the rules they'd have to follow because of that. So I think it was a smart choice for them to do that. But again, it relies on the audience's suspension of disbelief, which, again, if you pick up on the theme of the play, it's easier to believe and easier to pretend.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why they have a minimalist set in the first place. It's like, all right, we want to get you to view it as, like, let's say you're reading a novel and you picture the image in your head. You're supposed to view it in this lens. It's all about perspective, and I think that's the interesting thing. And then, like, I didn't even notice that James Madison and Hercules Mulligan were played by the same person at first, because they're acted so well. And it just kind of like shows the duality of the people in his life, from how, you have Thomas Jefferson, who he's vehemently opposed, versus Lafayette, who's his best friend and who vouches for him in the beginning of the film. You have this person in the first half who dies for him, and then it's his son who is born and brings new life, and yet it showcases the fleetingness of life because he doesn't pay attention to his son like he should, because he's too busy trying to do stuff, realizing that, like, he doesn't have enough time. There's some really great thematic things here. A big thing is, like, death, life, existentialism, legacy. Will our legacy live on when we're gone? And it's told through this cast so well, of how, like, the first half, like, we rise from the ashes, but the second half is like, where do we go from here? What happens once we get what we wanted? Do we keep climbing? Will we lose our morals along the way? And will that color how we were seen from the entire first half? And it's just such brilliantly, thematically, seamlessly blended to work with history. Doug?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I don't know what else to say.
I will bring this up in I will bring this up in terms of the sets. The reason they were done the way they were, part of it is to sort of give a black box theater effect. For those who don't know what black box theater is, it's where the stage is just completely dark, like completely painted black, even like the props sometimes. And you pretty much are relying on either the actors or whatever minor sets and props they have to kind of paint a picture for you, like transport you to like different areas and stuff, make you vision like where they are and where this is all taking place and everything. The other part is that it's supposed to signify the growth of America, starting from when Hamilton first gets off the boat to up at when he dies. Like, if you look in the beginning, after hit the whole opening number, Alexander Hamilton, you'll see that the stage is covered by like ropes and rafters and stuff. It's supposed to represent the boat he came on. And as the play goes on, they steadily keep building up the sets. You see wooden pillars, you see brick walls and stuff. So by the end of the play, it's almost a complete building. Again, mimicking America and how the founding fathers had to basically build it from the ground up. So it's very subtle, and again, most of your attention is focused on the actors throughout, but it is there. It's subtle, but it's there.
Mm-hmm. I think my favorite bit is still the rotating stage, because in a lot of the musical numbers, they'll have people on the outside of the circle that, in the part where it doesn't rotate, they'll have people on the inner rotating that goes one way, and then the innermost rotating going the other way. And somehow, they're able to not only do insane choreography with this, but they're able to move within all of these different circles, go in and go out, and dance and sing at the same time. That takes talent.
Some of the dancers are like insane with their abilities and the loose limbs they have. You know, some of the choreography they do and stuff. It's like if you really pay attention to some of the background people, it's like, damn, girl, I didn't know anyone could bend that way.
Especially because they have like breakdancing on the rotating stage, and I'm like, how?
Part of that too is sort of reflective of the choreography and staging. Because one thing I learned is that the choreographer, like who did staging and stuff for both Hamilton and Burr, purposely made it so that Hamilton was always walking around in circles and stuff to show that, you know, he's always on the move. He's always the wheels in his head are always turning. He's always like turning things about and stuff in like everything he tries to accomplish, whereas Burr mostly just walks in straight lines. Like, you know, he's afraid to like deviate from his path, or he wants to see what happens before he makes his move. Again, reflective of the two characters. And it's not until toward the end of the play their choreography actually reverses, with Burr now going in circles once he starts taking a cue from Hamilton, tries to go for the presidency and like be in the room where it happens, whereas Hamilton, having now suffered the consequences of his various actions, is now being more cautious, sort of, like up until like the end. So again, it's all like they're done for a reason. And I think it really adds, because again, with the minimalist set, you really have to like have the actors put on a show to like keep the attention.
And they really do. My favorite bits of the choreography are that like there are several numbers, Eye of the Hurricane and Satisfied, that involve rewinding, slowing, and stopping time. And it's like you have these people like backing up and showcasing things in slow motion, and like there are parts that like gave me chills, like the Eye of the Hurricane, where you have all these objects being set but they stop, and like you see them like slowly moving, or the Satisfied, where you have all these characters like back up and rewind and then go back together. Like whoever you mentioned, the choreographer, what's their name?
Andy Blankenbuehler. And he's won many a Tony Award nominations for his choreography. So you know they had someone serious working on this stuff.
They just did an outstanding job. I also think that the costuming is so good. Like if you look at the different ways they utilize the outfits and to show disparity between like the cast. In especially like Hamilton, he's wearing like a little bit of high color stuff, but he looks shabby compared to Aaron Burr. And you see throughout the cast how they're dressed, how their hair is done. It really gives you a perspective on who these characters are. Doug, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I know we were watching some like Watch Mojo videos, and they definitely said, the costuming choices, there were some, intentional things, like the fact that, Hamilton is dressed in green is actually, representative of money, what he wants, what he's on, what he, is in charge of, what he wishes to have, what he wishes to be. So, there's that, and I can't remember, all of the others, but obviously, yes, there's a lot of representation just simply with even like the color of the dressings alone.
Yeah,
For
like Thomas Jefferson, if you noticed, dead ringer for Prince or Jimi Hendrix. Basically
Oh
to
yeah, he's
symbolize
all
what a
purple.
celebrity is. Yeah. Oh
Hmm.
my god, I want that coat. I want that coat so bad. You have no idea.
So what did I miss? Oh god. Okay, so we're not going to talk about the individual songs yet. We're going to save that for the next act, but I wanted to talk about the singing itself because I think what really brings us out is the performance of this cast is not just talking. 99% of this play and film is singing to tell the story. It has some of the most amount of songs that I've ever seen in a play. There is dialogue, but it's mostly as a transition to the next part, and a lot of it is just like song, rap, and in a play like that, you really need to have people who are on. But they do a great job, and it shocked me to know that the only person who was classically trained as a rapper is Daveed Diggs, who plays Lafayette.
Well, that much is obvious. You seen how fast he raps? Like, Jesus. Every time
He
I
got
try
a
to do those
record.
quick parts. Yeah. Every time I try to replicate those parts, like, I always stumble over my words. Like, I already have a speech impediment as is, but, like, I try to rehearse that, like, thinking it'll help, but no. You gotta have talent in order to do that type of rapping.
He has a world record for the fastest rap when he says, "I'm making these redcoats, taking this horse by the reins, making redcoats redder with blood stains." Like he says that in like I think 5-10 seconds. It's like he had a record for that, and it's like you can tell, but like one of the things that really work is that a lot of his stuff kind of builds up, and there's a lot of internal rhyme, which I associate with Eminem, where like you have the end sentence rhyme, but you have stuff in the middle also rhyme with the next bit, and it's cleverly done in that instance. And I think that works for his character, especially because Lafayette is all about like he starts off as a Frenchman who is unable to pronounce anarchy, and then he becomes and grows over time. And yeah, there's been a lot of memes of like, oh, he can't pronounce anarchy. Now he's like in the trenches and he's suddenly like rapping bars. And I'm like, that's the point. And then when he's Thomas Jefferson, like he does like a bit where he's like, if this kid ain't gonna listen to dissidents, then this kid is out. Like there's that part, and I'm just like, man, this guy he has serious chops.
It's funny because like when Weird Al did his polka version of that, he sings that whole part right there like really quick, and he actually does it coherently. Like I'm nothing short of impressed.
Yeah, the loose lips and the diction on these people is insane.
He's like, I'm in the cabinet. I ain't complicit in Washington grabbing that power and kissing it. If Washington ain't gonna listen to disciplined dissidents, this is the difference. This kid is out. You know how long it took me to be able to get that?
It takes a lot to just be able to say. And Al did a whole polka. Like, that's another thing that was shown. Like, the Al polka for Hamilton is so good. But it shows, like, it does show that the skill on display here. And it's not just Daveed Diggs. Like, I think everyone puts in a great part. And Lin is a centerpiece, and he slowly grows and like evolves throughout the course of the film. And I think the interesting thing to me is when I first heard the opening number of the film, I wasn't initially super impressed, mostly because it starts on a low note. Like when Aaron Burr shows up, he still has a little bit of his lisp, like he's supposed to, but it's a song that builds. And I feel like, you know, Alexander Hamilton is a great way to introduce him, because it's a song that's not necessarily impressive on its own right as it starts, but it builds to that just like Alexander Hamilton is going to be building to other things. But once we get to My Shot, that's when I was just like, oh, Lin has chops. Because it's everyone involved in that. So like the R&B rap, fantastic, but then you have, oh my god, Leslie Odom Jr. as Aaron Burr. When he sings "Wait for It," I get such chills because like I've tried, I can't get to the timbre of that chorus. I can only get so close. And Renee Elise Goldsberry, who plays Angelica, when she sings "Satisfied," especially the remix where she does "Satisfied" with the Reynolds pamphlet, oh my god, I get goosebumps. In Nonstop, History Has Its Eyes. There's so many good things that we're going to talk about in our next act. But I think the people make this. It's a musical in every sense, and I think that's what makes it stands out to me because I'm blown away by these songs even today. Kat.
Yeah, the funny thing was, it wasn't even supposed to be like that in the beginning, because basically Lin-Manuel Miranda, he started with the first opening song, but after that he's like, you know what? I gotta keep going. Like, I think the whole place should be like this, because once you set the tone, it's like, it's kind of hard to stop. And honestly, how many rap operas do you know of nowadays? I mean, obviously, we've had operas, we've had operettas, plays that have a lot more songs than they should, but nothing that where there's continuous rap. And granted, they switch it up, R&B and even like a Beatles tribute and stuff, but the point is, like, most of it's nonstop. Like, there's barely any just regular dialogue. Like, maybe one or two times throughout the play. But I honestly think it benefits so much more because it keeps up that energy. And even when it switches, it doesn't lose the momentum. Like, everyone keeps it going. And, like, it's nothing short of impressive. It just... And the fact that he put so much time and effort into some of those songs, like, it took him an entire year to compose the song "I'm Not Throwing Away My Shot" because he wanted it to be that perfect. Like, can you imagine working on a single song for an entire year? Like, Jesus.
Yeah, it's crazy. Doug.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a lot like watching Les Mis, because it's like almost entirely through song, no dialogue. As Kat said, it's basically like an opera. And then, of course, you've also got like the different genres of rap and hip hop, through the decades, through, different artists, that each of the characters kind of conveys. You have a rap battle. You have two rap battles.
Epic rap battles of history. Thomas Jefferson versus
Alexander Hamilton. Begin. But yeah, and then you got like for "I'll Be Back," you got like this Beatles or British Invasion style rock song. You got like all these different sort of Broadway ballad style songs throughout, because definitely it's Broadway inspired to the point where during the Adams administration, he references 1776 with "Sit down, John, you fat mother."
Okay, now going off that point, I do want to bring up so one thing that I found out, there was actually a cut song from the musical that was the Adams administration, and they only performed it live once. And you can see it on YouTube. It's very easy to find. It's really good, but I can see why it was cut, because like it's basically summed up at the same time. John Adams is a horrible person. He's racist. He doesn't show up to work. And they already rag on him, saying, John Adams doesn't have a real job anyway. So I think it's fun.
Funny enough, he was supposed to be a character, as was Ben Franklin, but their roles got dropped pretty quick in favor of focusing more on, Hamilton and Jefferson and Madison and all of them, which I think was for the best, because considering that both both Adams and Franklin were the main characters in 1776. Like, you can't really redo those characters. Like, those characters from that play are iconic. It's hard to redo them, especially in a way that shows them a lot more negatively. And I think it's better that John Adams was just ragged on off screen, because the man deserved it. I mean, the big reason he's the enemy in this is he was highly anti-immigrant, and this play is about immigrants, specifically one immigrant. So you can see why Hamilton hated him so much.
Immigrants, we get the job done. But also, like, one reason that I am upset that the song was cut, and I get why it was cut, but there's a point in the song where he's talking about John. He's like, say hi to the Jeffersons, and right next to him is sitting Daveed Diggs, and completely in character, he gives Lin a look that like he laughs for a second and gives him a look like Jefferson would, like, say what? Like, I wish that was in the actual play, because that is too perfect a reaction. And there's a couple really interesting things in that cut song that I thought were great. Doug, did you have anything to add?
Well, fun little bit of history in relation to that. Both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died on the same day, although apparently Jefferson died first. And ironically, John Adams' last words were "Jefferson lives." But apparently, they had a rivalry, to match that of Hamilton and Jefferson.
Harry Truman holding up the newspaper saying Dewey wins.
Speaking of tidbits, and I'm not entirely sure how true this is, because this was from a comment on that same video, is that, like, apparently the only vacation that George Washington ever took, he brought Thomas Jefferson, his friend, and Hamilton, his other good friend. They were too tired of politics. They wanted to go fishing, and yet they couldn't stop arguing for so long that he canceled the vacation and went back early. And that was how Aaron Burr and Hamilton ruined his only vacation. I don't know how true that is, but that's a fun story.
No, I believe it with the way Hamilton was. Like, he was a big contrarian, so pretty much made enemies wherever he went. Like, he made powerful friends, but he made powerful enemies too. Which, given someone who writes all the time and speaks his mind all the time, that type of shit's just bound to happen.
Every proclamation guarantees free ammunition for your enemies.
Why do you write like you're running out of time? Well, I know why he has enemies, because as pointed out in Drunk History, one of the things they don't talk about in the play is that, when he's invited to the Constitutional Convention, some of the things he brings up is like maybe president for life. Oh my God, he's a monarchist. He had some radical ideas.
Yeah, a little bit. Talks for 6 hours. The convention is listless. Bright young man.
Yo, who the F is this?
I think my favorite bit is when he's just like, Alexander Hamilton at the Constitutional Conventions. I was invited to the Constitutional Convention. He's so happy.
This is a fanboy squee.
Okay, so back to the theming here. One of the big themes in this play is about death, life. Hamilton says a lot in the play, like his mother died in his arms from sickness. He couldn't die. And, like, that's a huge thing that's hanging over the entire play. And there's a character that specifically is showcased to embody death. And it's something that I didn't notice at first. But, she's supposed to, I think, represent his mother, like the ghost of his mother. In the fact that, like, she's there whenever death happens. She's looming in the background, staring at Aaron Burr, staring at Hamilton. When people are, like, going to die, she's right there. There's a part where, like, a bullet flies just over Hamilton's head, and she's the one carrying it. And I think, like, it's something you won't notice on your first viewing, but it's really well done, especially because she's primarily there during the final duel. And having Death be a character always is interesting to me. I know they kind of did it in like Puss in Boots, and they've done it before, but having it be this subtle character that's not an antagonist, that could be friendly, is really interesting. What do you think, Kat?
Yeah, it's actually rather clever because again, you don't notice it up until the end because you're looking at like this woman who looks like she's holding the bullet out the gun. You're thinking, why are they having her do that? I mean, can't we just imagine the bullets there? Why do they have to have that person specifically there to slowly inch the bullet toward Hamilton? But like you said, once you watch it on review, you'll see just how much of a presence she is at certain points in the play, and her presence always signifies death in some way. In fact, there's 2 instances where she foreshadows death for both of the characters of Philip and Lauren, like because she's a soldier fighting alongside John Lawrence, and she shakes his hand just before he goes off to fight in the Battle of South Carolina, and he dies. Whereas later on, when he's Philip and he's looking for George Eager, she's the one who points him toward where Eager is, and even flirts with him. So, like, he literally flirts with death. And then the last instance... Yeah, the last instance is when... toward the end, when Hamilton and Burr are writing letters to each other that ultimately lead up to them declaring a duel, she's the one that's handing Burr the paper and quill to write his declaration. So yeah, she's been there the whole time. It's subtle, but once you know she's there, it's hard to ignore.
There's also the point where like she is killed as a messenger by King George. And it's like, there's so many, like, interesting depictions here. And it's not outright saying, like, death is not embodied as something to be feared. It's just something looming in the background. And there's something I find so fascinating about that. Doug?
I imagine death, it feels so much more like a memory. Where's it going to get me? I mean, yeah, honestly, he keeps basically repeating that line a lot, and, you know, the threat of death just looming over him all the time is, you know, all too, you know, I guess motivating for him to make something of his life. And then, yeah, to have a character actually portraying the bullet or, you know, death in some sort of way, just, it you know, makes it all that more, you know, anxious of a space. I mean, honestly, there's not a whole lot I can say because it took me a while and, you know, everybody telling me that, oh, this character is there for me to even notice it. So yeah, it's one of those things you definitely need to keep watching it over and over to really get the full, you know, impact of it. But yeah, definitely interesting choice that they went with.
All right. I think one of the final things that I'm going to bring up before we get into our intermission is, you know, let's talk about like the first and second half and what they kind of represent. Because the first half of this play is very much rising from the ashes. It's, you know, we see the origins of Hamilton. We see that he comes from nothing. People, you know, drew a collection to bring him to America to start a new life. And every single instance of this first half is about like, all right, we got to rise up. We got to raise our status. We got to elevate because we don't want to stay in this poverty, I should say. We don't want to stay in this poverty, but at the end of the day, like, we have to fight those who oppress us, and we have to keep moving because what happens after this? What happens after this? There's also like a huge theme of time where Hamilton does like to think ahead, but he always feels like this might be his last moment. So he keeps thinking, all right, if this is my last moment, I need to make it count and I need to rise up and get a big status. Like when he's in the Continental Army, he's just like, all right, give me soldiers, make me a general, make me a captain, just give me a platoon, please. And he keeps saying no, but like, if I have something, if I have this after the war, maybe I'll have something. But at the same time, it almost like he wants to meet his death on the battlefield because he wants to have a legacy to leave behind, but he doesn't feel like he's going to live to see tomorrow. Whereas the second half, he finally gets to the other side of the war, and then he starts seeing other people dying. And he's just like, all right, well, now I have to create a legacy. Now I have time, but I need to use that in order to keep making more and more things. I need to extend my legacy, because what do I have left if I die today? And he makes mistakes. It's mistakes, imperfections. It's a lot about like how he wants to create this economy for the colonies, and he wants to make it into something more, because it's like, all right, fine, we stopped King George. What happens now? What do we do now? Like, I don't want to leave my legacy to be like, oh yeah, you just destroyed what was already there. And it's more like, all right, we got to keep rising, keep creating. But in the process of doing that, he takes the wrong advice and he makes mistakes, because you can't always be right. I think it's a great way to do this 2-act structure, because like, you showed me Into the Woods, and we saw Into the Woods together, and it's like, what happens if in the first half is like everyone gets happily ever after? What happens after happily ever after? And this does this with history in such a weird and interesting way. Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, I think basically we could sum it up as the first act is the Revolutionary War and Hamilton having allies. And then the second half is his political career and all his allies becoming his enemies. Obviously,
so it's Davy Crockett?
I guess. I mean, basically you have at the start him, becoming allies with Burr, with with Hercules Mulligan, with Lawrence, with Lafayette, him meeting and growing love between him and Eliza and the Schuyler sisters, and then the second half happens, and then his allies become his enemies, or something like that. Basically, like, now his ally Lafayette is his enemy Thomas Jefferson. His ally Hercules Mulligan is now his enemy James Madison. Peggy Schuyler becomes the catalyst that breaks up Hamilton and the Schuyler sisters. So there's all that happening. That whole duality that we were talking about earlier.
Anything to add, Kat?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you could sum up the whole play with one word, like satisfied. Because as we know, he will never be satisfied. He will never be satisfied. Because while yes, Hamilton definitely wants to make something of his life now that he knows that he can't theoretically die. Like, he wants to do all he can, and especially once he loses his best friend, he wants even more to succeed and not die, unknown and in poverty. But the problem is he doesn't know when to stop. And because he doesn't know when to stop, that's what gets him in trouble later on, and it almost destroys his legacy. So, if anything, it's about, someone, first of all, learning their limits, learning that, you can outrun death, but eventually you're going to start to yearn for it. Because let's face it, I mean, but by the end of the play, Burr probably wishes he was the one who was dead. Because given what he suffered afterwards, I think, like, Hamilton had the more merciful death. But, yeah, again, this is like his whole realization, because like it's impressive what he was able to do. It was his intentions were noble. It's just you got to know when to bail, and he never really learned that up until the end. And that's when he literally basically threw away his life. So it's tragic, but it's also like it's also poignant in a way. It's a good way to show that it's like, yes. Live your life to the fullest. Do what you can with your abilities, but don't forget those that you had to trample over along the way. And yeah, I mean, there's so many themes to this that are interwoven. Like, there's so many takeaways, but I mean, when at the end of the day, it's just the life of this man who did all of these amazing things, who made friends and enemies along the way, and ultimately, what is his legacy? Like, it comes down to a single bullet. But even then, like, look what that led to. Now we have an entire rap musical about this person that infamously died in a duel. So at least you could say, in a way, his legacy was preserved.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about individual characters, individual songs and stuff in the second act. There's so much themes, so much stuff that we can discuss. I think the biggest summation here is that George Washington has one of my favorite songs in the play called History Has Its Eyes on You. And a lot of it can be taken in two very different ways. He was saying, like, I was younger than you are now when I was given my first command, and I led my men straight into a massacre. Like, he made every mistake, and he felt ashamed. Like, and this is true. Washington almost never became a general because he had the worst first career move. It's why he's so lenient on Charles Lee. It's why, he's trying to teach Hamilton about it. And like, he's like, just let me, he's saying, no matter whatever happens now, history has its eyes on you. And you can take that to mean like, look, go out, do great things, but also history has a way of showing like you don't get to decide who tells your story or who paints you as the villain or the hero. And it's like he keeps playing this in his head, and it's like one of the themes in Nonstop, which is the final song of the act, the leitmotif, and it's like, history has its eyes on you. What are you going to do? And Hamilton sees this as a calling, but, if Hamilton had stopped there, would history have remembered him more fondly? And it's just such a cool, like, dual thing, where it's just like, from here on in, history has its eyes on you, and from this point on, you don't get to decide who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And that's a huge part of the second act. It's just, you don't have control. Things are going to happen. You are going to have to deal with that and be prepared for the consequences.
And that was the Vienna Wood Dance in D, one of my all-time favorites. And now let's make that random call with today's $10,000 question. It's a tough one. Who shot Alexander Hamilton in that famous duel? All right, let's go to the phones and see who's out there.
Hello?
Hello, for $10,000, who shot... Excuse me?
Let me get some milk. No!
I'm afraid your time is almost up. I'm sorry, maybe next time.
Got milk?
And we're back. Soon you'll see. You'll remember that. Where's everyone?
So what did I miss? What did I miss? Hey. Oh, yeah, that was quick.
That was a quick little intermission there. It's time for us to get down to the actual brass taxes and, talk about the people in this musical, because we went an hour and a half. We didn't talk about anyone in this musical. Can you believe that?
I know, right? How do we talk about Hamilton without actually talking about Hamilton?
I mean, it's crazy. So I think the first thing, I'm not going to talk about Hamilton. This whole play is about Hamilton. We're gonna kind of build up to Hamilton. First, I want to talk about his rival Aaron Burr, or as he's introduced, the damn fool who shot him. I don't know if you've seen the old Got Milk commercials about
Oh yeah.
who killed
Oh,
it's
boy.
Aaron Burr.
Oh, boy.
Aaron Burr.
You know they recreated
So-
that with Leslie Odom Jr. I'm like, how could you not? That is the only reason anybody in our generation knows who Alexander Hamilton is and who shot him. The only reason.
Yeah. Yeah, those old Got Milk commercials. So, yeah, Aaron Burr, played by Leslie Odom Jr., is kind of like the rival figure in Hamilton's life. And his whole deal is that he's a trust fund baby. He's a rich kid, but he's an orphan, which kind of gives him common ground with Hamilton, because Hamilton's also an orphan. He was raised to be the best of the best. He goes to King's Scholarship, graduated in a scholarship. So like he's this really big scholar type, but his fatal flaw is that he doesn't want to rock the boat. Like his whole thing is like, talk less, smile more. You'll give your enemies less ammunition if you don't run your mouth off. And to an extent, I can see his whole point, because like you have these people who are just spouting shit at everyone. Like there's not a lot of like room for back and forth. They're like, no, this guy sucks, and it's just like he's just like, you know what? Why don't you nod and smile, and that way you can double your chances and not be an asshole. So like to an extent, but the whole thing, his fatal flaw is that he doesn't have any true stances while he is waiting for his chance. And his song "Wait for It" is so good because he's like, I know I'm original, I know I'm going to do great things, but I'm waiting for my chance. And it's just, he doesn't take any action until it's too late. Kat.
Yeah, I gotta say, it's so weird, like, because I know that Aaron Burr is obviously the antagonist in this play. Well, I air quote that antagonist, because we all know what he ultimately does by the end, but the thing is, the way he's portrayed in this, it's actually a lot more sympathetic than one would expect, especially of someone like him. And I gotta be honest, I actually sympathize more with Burr than I do with Hamilton. To an extent.
Same.
Yeah, because, like, I understand how easy it is to relate to Hamilton, he grew up underprivileged, he's an immigrant coming to a new land, has to build himself on the way up through hard work, he has to prove himself constantly, and being a creator, his mind is always working towards solutions and new things that he could use to improve his world. I mean, what's not to sympathize about that? However, with Aaron Burr, he comes from a place of privilege, which you think, how do you sympathize with someone who already had everything readily handed to him, who already has like a sort of station by the time he meets Hamilton? But like, as he explains in his song, unlike Hamilton, who goes into this gung-ho, guns blazing, who has like nothing to lose, so he can put his all into it, Burr has a ton to lose. He has like his fortune, he has his reputation, he has a stance with certain people and communities to think about. That's why he is so hesitant to speak his mind, because you piss off the wrong people, that screws your chances of doing what you want to do. And as someone like me, I won't say that I was privileged per se. I certainly wasn't poor, but I definitely had like relatives and acquaintances that were better off than me who would help me with stuff. When you're from that sort of environment, you have to learn to like act a certain way, put on a certain face, make sure you do what you're told, otherwise you lose everything. You get things taken away from you. So I can totally understand Burr basically like, wishy-washying, yada-yadaing his way throughout his whole life up to a certain point. So it's very easy to see, like, you know, his stance on everything, why he's so at odds with Hamilton. But at the same time, you see him eventually realize, well, I kind of got to take a play out of his book, because otherwise how am I going to become president? That's what I really want. And unfortunately, it's going down that path that ultimately bites him in the butt and gets him to the point that where we all know him as. And it's like, yeah, I still don't think he's right for what he did. I get the mindset why he did it, because again, this is a potential life or death situation here, but given the fallout of everything, it's like, dude, was that really worth it?
Yeah, like, Aaron Burr is interesting. Like, I grew up upper middle class. I was always told by other people that I was privileged. I don't believe that we were super privileged. Like, yeah, my dad was involved in a lot of, like, my mom's a mortgage underwriter, and my dad sold houses, and my dad was also involved in, like, a lot of stuff like zoning and stuff that kind of gave us some status. Everyone knew my father. But at the same time, I would never call myself privileged, because, you know, I wasn't given everything I wanted. One of my best friends was always given everything he wanted, and I always considered him more well off than I was. But it's all kind of like this mindset, and my parents raised me right to where, like, you know, you don't go after everything. You gotta keep some cards to your chest, because what you do affects others' reputation. But at the same time, you shouldn't deny yourself things that you enjoy. And so, like, I was, like, on the cusp, I guess you could say, upper middle class, but even still, I can kind of really gel with Aaron Burr in this case. Now, granted, he makes some bad choices, very bad choices. He has an affair with a British officer's wife, which, you know, he's not a saint. He's definitely not a saint. And, like, he goes through a lot of stuff, but I think what really cements me in liking his character is, ironically, like, the stuff that he says after the duel, where he's just like, there was room in this world for both of us. And there's a point where he's just like, historians are going to remember me for this one act. I get vilified, but Hamilton has done all this stuff. And I'm just like, I sympathize that, because it still happens today. People get vilified for one single act, and it's just like, no, you gotta take a look at all their entire life. And I feel like a big part of this play is that, hey, people aren't one thing. People aren't their singular mistakes. People are complex, and they're capable of doing great things and bad things. And I think that's really shown in Aaron Burr. Doug?
I mean, let's face it. Aaron Burr and Hamilton were both kind of idiots in the end. You know, both of them basically, you know, they wouldn't stop arguing over, you know, what's done is done. And it ultimately led them to where, you know, they are in a duel to end each other's lives. So, yeah, it was over something. I hesitate to say it was over nothing, but it wasn't that important. But yes, with Burr, it is kind of, you know, like I mentioned before, how, like, Act 1 is, you know, the rise of Hamilton, and you know, him with his allies, and then you know, Act 2 is his fall in politics, and you know, the rise of his enemies. That basically does go, especially for Aaron Burr, because you see, you know, how friendly they were to each other in the beginning, and how that just kind of falls apart throughout the second act, as, you know, they basically find their own paths, and you know, Burr finally decides that, you know, he's actually going to, you know, stop waiting and take opportunity where he sees it. When you think about it, I mean, obviously, you know, Burr's interesting in Hamilton, and while this is Hamilton's story, I think it would be interesting to also have a Burr side of the story too, because his life post-duel is actually quite fascinating. It's like
I've heard it's like a soap opera. Like, Cal was telling me like it's crazy, and I'm like, I would like
It
to see
really
like a
is.
Hamilton 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Like, he goes out west, Thomas Jefferson's basically trying to, like, get him thrown in jail. He's actually kind of progressive with his daughter, teaching her to fight and everything. Toward the end of his life, he gets married again, and it winds up in a divorce. And in a bit of serendipity there, the divorce lawyer is Alexander Hamilton Jr.
Oh. Bruh.
Not to mention
That's some irony right there.
Not to mention he dies like I think a day after his divorce was finalized. After she took back all of her money.
And I think he may have had aspirations of ruling Mexico too.
Yeah, he apparently tried to buy a whole bunch of land, both to, like, he was seeking to buy back the Louisiana Purchase and then basically create, like, his own, like, semi-country and then use it to, like, invade Mexico. Like, he was actually tried for treason at one point because of this.
Damn, wow. This would make an interesting story. Aaron Burr is a fascinating character, and granted, like, as we see in Drunk History, not everything that's shown from Burr is completely accurate, but at the same time, I think the story that Lin puts together pits these two characters against each other and shows their similarities, their differences, how they're good and how they're bad. And I think it really works, especially when you compare it to Alexander Hamilton, which, again, played by Lin-Manuel Miranda. So let's talk a little bit about Hamilton. He basically came from nothing. His father left him. His mother died in her own sickness. Cousin committed unaliving. So like he was left with nothing. He was working for his mother's landlord, and hurricane came through, destroyed everything. So he had nothing, and he came over to America to based on the kindness of everyone around him, because he showed that, through his writings, he was worthy. And this whole tale is him rising up from the ashes, going, he has nothing. He wants to prove that while he comes from poor origins, he wants to prove that he's good enough. And as the play goes on, it becomes too much for him, because the higher he climbs, the harder it is for him to convince people around him that he's worth it. And he takes it a little bit too far. Kat, what do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a story about someone who is desperate to prove themselves, who, once they finally get what they want, realizes it isn't enough, but then gets paranoid about losing the thing that he earns, and ultimately ends up losing it regardless because of his paranoia. Like, it really is like a Shakespearean tragedy in a way, how Hamilton's story plays out. Because it's like, you start off rooting for him big time. He's the clear underdog in this scenario. You see he has the talent to get himself further. And ultimately he does. I mean, he becomes the first U.S. Treasurer of the United States. Like, he survived the Revolutionary War. He created, like, the Coast Guard and the Post Office and all these other things. He's written thousands of writings. Like, he should be a legend, in the same vein as George Washington and Ben Franklin and all of them. But because of him basically flying too close to the sun and, pissing off the wrong people, he met an untimely end that really shouldn't have come about when you think about it. So, yeah, like, it really is like watching a Shakespearean play, from beginning to end. And it's like, you sympathize with him, but at the same time, you could see why people were pissed off at him. Like, again, I compare this to Curb Your Enthusiasm, where it's like, yeah, you have this person that is clearly getting screwed over, is right in their anger and everything, but they're such an asshole, it's hard to sympathize with them.
Yeah, and it's just like you see in his reactions to things, how he reacts to Thomas Jefferson. He takes it always that one step too far, where it's not enough to point out that this person's wrong. He's like, yeah, well, you're an awful person too, and like keeps bashing and like that's the problem. He flies too close, but also he has other demons. I mean, he's a womanizer, kind of like Aaron Burr was, but. The funniest line in the play to me is like Martha Washington named her feral tomcat after him, and it's true. Like he was a huge womanizer, and that came out in the Reynolds pamphlet, which he posted himself because he thought that was better than embezzling money. And I mean, I guess these days it would be better than embezzling, depending, because our nation is kind of going through some stuff right now. But
well,
it's like,
I mean, go ahead, finish your thought.
it's just like, it's interesting how like he clutches and clings to what he has, constantly tries to rise his station, constantly tries to see like, all right, look, I have a legacy to protect. I want to be seen as a good person. I want to be seen as a great person for like solving national debt and all this other stuff. Just ignore the fact that I slept with someone else that's not my wife.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, but I do want to point out two things, though, because I know we're going to get those comments about that. The whole Tomcat thing, I believe, is actually fake, because I believe Lin admitted he sort of made that part up, because he mentioned that it might have come from some obscure critique that John Adams made of Hamilton, calling him a Tomcat, but there's no, like, actual proof that he said it. So Lin just read about it and thought it was funny and kind of just wanted to, again, establish Hamilton that, he is a bit of a womanizer, even though, again, that wasn't really a term back then, the, Tomcat. And the other thing with the Reynolds pamphlet, so here's the thing, while that really did happen, the lead up to it, they don't really stress the importance of why he did this per se. It's like, from our point of view, it seems like he didn't have to say anything. He could have waited until like Jefferson or Madison or Burr attempted to slander him before he released it. But he kind of jumped the gun just because he was so paranoid about preserving his legacy. When in truth, he was being threatened, with actual embezzlement, because they were seeing all these checks and stuff, believing he was stealing from the treasury, and while he said that it wasn't true, they, were insistent upon it, and they were going to try, send him to trial, so he felt he had no choice but to reveal his dirty laundry. It's still, he didn't have to do it in such graphic detail, but, that's how he felt that it was best to do it, overwhelm people with truth.
And
And
maybe
like,
he should have told his wife before he tells the public.
Oh yeah, that's another dick move for certain he should have done.
Yeah, and it's like, look, I like the framing in the play where he's just like, I wrote my way out of everything. Like, he used his quill as a weapon, and he's just like, okay, let's try that again. I get it, but like, not in this way. And there's a little bit too much and like, this kind of highlights the problem with like, yeah, there's some details that have been changed. One of the things I looked into during our intermission was that, the fishing story I was talking about with Hamilton, there is actually official debate among historians if this actually took place, but it's probably false, simply because Thomas Jefferson and George Washington took meticulous notation documents, and Thomas Jefferson was sick at the time. There is historical record of Washington having gone on that fishing trip, but Hamilton probably didn't go because there was no mention of Hamilton in either of their notes. So again, it's just one of those cases of good stories getting kind of propped up a little bit, this like the Tomcat thing. It's a fun aspect, but it's not true. Doug.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously the Hamilton is quite a complicated character. It's like he's done all these great things for the country, but he's also been ridiculously stupid at times, and just very bad at reading the room. Um,
Would you say he was a crimbo? For those who don't know, crimbo is a himbo who does crimes.
I mean, he's not really a criminal aside from the one, affair. So, I mean, you can't really, fully call him a criminal. I mean, history is littered with, good politicians who have done probably far worse than what Hamilton has done.
Yeah.
He's more guilty of just letting his, mouth shoot off and, wind up suffering consequences for it, or, just acting without really thinking. But yeah, I mean, obviously his strongest suit is to write. He definitely, wants to prove himself, and it's just like, it just never goes away. He's, like I said, why do you write like you're running out of time? He just wants to keep doing things because it's like he feels like, there's a million things he hasn't done, but just you wait.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, again, just the biggest issues in his life just come from his, his stupidity of, he rather than go with his wife and, sister-in-law and the whole family off to, the lake, he decides to stay behind because he's just got to fight Thomas Jefferson. And then he winds up so exhausted from it, he winds up getting taken advantage of, and thus, lets himself have an affair. Then he tries to hide it, but when they come looking for him because they think he's embezzling, he just like, rather than, just keep it between them and, obviously let his wife know before he goes and tells the general public all about it. It's like that, that leads to them basically kind of separating. Her basically wanting nothing to do with him up until another fallout of his affair is that Philip winds up in a duel and getting killed, and that ultimately, it causes such grief that eventually he is able to be forgiven by Eliza. And then, yeah, like, his stupidity of just not letting the subject go with his argument with Burr winds up getting him killed. So it's just like, he just can't
a lot of it
stop.
is pride, and a lot of it is just pride, but a lot of it is he keeps talking about like how, what if he died at this moment? Like, what does he have to leave behind? And I feel like every single step of the way he keeps like second guessing what he's got, and he wants to try for more. I'm
gonna assume he just he looks forward all the time and never bothers to look back, which, I mean, in some cases is a good idea, but it's like, hey, you've done all this stuff. You've done like a million things. You don't have to keep going. You don't have to keep striving for more.
To be fair, on some counts, like, he was going to lose his job if the bill didn't go through. So, like, I get that. You don't want to, like, leave your family penniless. He can't rely on his father forever. So, like, he wants to keep going in that regard. But there are problems that he creates. Like, he's the one who specifically tells Philip what to do in the duel. And, he's just like, well, you could have told him not to duel, like for honor, but everything's legal in New Jersey. Kat, anything to add?
For the record, not everything is legal in New Jersey. I speak as someone
It's
from
not.
New Jersey.
Yeah, Burr is. It was. He was convicted of murder, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, he was tried for murder, but the the whole thing kind of fell through because again, the whole nature of dueling in secret is that you do it under certain circumstances where certain people testimonies can't be used in court, and then certain things are considered just circumstantial evidence, so the whole thing just got thrown out.
You have him turn around so he can have deniability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty much what Doug said. Like, it's clear that that Hamilton is more concerned about just reaching for the sun and just not looking back at the wings that are melting. Again, the whole Icarus complex, and yeah, like his whole thing with his son definitely is his fault. Like, on the one hand, yes, he told him, look, you don't want to be a murderer, so throw away your shot. And because if he's truly a bad guy, if he's truly a good guy, he will do the same. And I mean, technically that did happen, but regardless, because Hamilton is so about pride and defending himself, it probably would have been out of character for him to tell his son otherwise, to not do the duel at all, because again, the whole thing's about honor, and he is all about defending honor. So despite the fact that it's a really stupid circumstance, which never should have happened, there was no way he was going to back down from it, because that's just the type of person he is. And yeah, what was that term? Pride comes before the fall. That's basically Hamilton's life in a nutshell.
Yeah, too much pride can kill a man. I'm going to go for a wild card for the next character. I'm moving on to King George III, who is only in 2-3 parts of this play, but is a looming presence and is very important, played by Jonathan Groff. I really love this character, and is probably one of the more well-known characters because of the song You'll Be Back. I think it's one of those things where this whole play is about Revolutionary War and the fallout, and having King George kind of looming in the background until he finally shows up and does something really cool, and then kind of devolves into a crying, whiny child, and then starts dabbing and breakdancing during the rental pamphlet. It's really interesting to see how this king is portrayed in Mad King George III. As Kat pointed out to me, there was actually a wardrobe malfunction that kind of led to something thematic. You want to take that away, Kat?
Yeah, so during the initial run, as well as the recording of the play, you notice that King George is dressed entirely in royal regalia. So, he has, the whole crown, the cape, everything. Well, apparently, with the crown, it was not stable. It was supposed to be attached to his wig, but because it's so big and bulky and, flashy and everything, it kept, threatening to fall off his head. And that almost nearly happened in his first number. So because of that, even though he had, choreography, certain moves to do, he was, afraid of the crown just falling off, mid-song. So he pretty much just stays, stock still for the most part during the song. And honestly, it kind of attributes to his character, and I think that's why they kept it in, is because, King George, gradually goes insane over time. At least that's what the rumors are of why he's called Mad King George. So you see in the beginning, he's all Remrod straight. He's looks like he's struggling to keep in anger, keep in his facade, portray himself as the ideal English king and everything. And then as the play goes on and you remove the cape and it's clear that they fix the crown and everything, he starts getting more loose with his movements and everything, to the point where eventually he starts devolving into maniacal laughter and then just prances about he's a schoolgirl having fun playing hopscotch and stuff. So it's a nice I guess unintentional symbolic of his descent into madness. So I really appreciate that. Plus, Jonathan Groff's performance is just brilliant. Like, I already liked him in other stuff, and of course, everyone knows him from Frozen and everything, which he never got really a song in the first movie. He had like half a song and that was it, so they made up for it in the sequel. But seeing him on like full display here on the stage, I think it just showcases him at his best. And I thought he knocked it out of the park.
I definitely agree. I think it's like there's some things that I couldn't have pulled off. The fact that like he goes from like praise and poise to spitting, and somehow he's able to spit and then like go back to poise afterwards. It's like it's very minimal movement, but it does like it's played very well. Like I think King George is an underrated part of the play. He has one of the best songs, probably one of the most memorable ones. But when push comes to shove, he's gonna send a fully armed battalion, to remind you of his love. Doug.
Yeah, I think like you said, there's not a whole lot to say on King George, but obviously when he comes in, it is a show-stopping number, and it's just he's a lot of fun, and what you call it. But it is kind of funny to see him as like the jilted lover who's like basically got all the power in the relationship, and it's like, oh, don't you leave me, or things won't be the same. You don't come crying back to me when you go off and try and find somebody else, because you're not gonna.
I also love how the play opens up with like, oh yeah, thank you for coming to my play. It's like it's King George is narrating, and like into the intermission it's really interesting how they kind of portray that as like he's funding his own play that kind of debunks his mythology.
I think it's kind of funny because it's like to throw back to my usual reference of fake doctors, real friends. Whenever they have Bill Lawrence, the creator of Scrubs, on the podcast, he's like, oh, thanks for doing my podcast, even though he's like hardly ever on it. It's like just that power move of, I didn't do it, but I am responsible for it.
Podcast. Welcome everyone. This is Doug's podcast.
He shows up and takes all the credit, just like Aquaman.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like first he gets pregnant, and then he says like he did all the work. I mean, come on.
Well, one thing I do find interesting though, like you really don't see this too often, because when you think about it, King George really has no business being in this play. It's like, yes, he's the big ultimate looming threat to the United States, but he's just there in the background. He never actually interacts with any of the main cast. Like, he has the ensemble once in a while, and he shows up in a dance number or two, but he never is, like, directly a threat to anyone. And he kind of stays that way throughout, like, the whole play. It's very rare you see that, like, in whether it's in a movie or in theater. But it for some reason it works. Like, both in the performance, both in the song and everything, it just works. And I've seen people complain about how, like, oh, why do they make the only white guy, like, the King of England? And it's like, because he's our oldest enemy, duh. He's America's enemy.
Because
you're telling
we don't like Britain.
It's like, you're telling me you're sympathizing with America's oldest enemy? Come on. But yeah, like I said, it's a thing that should, in practice, should not work, and yet it does. And it's honestly one of my favorite songs on the show, like, You'll Be Back. And funny thing, I read about this, because Lin-Manuel Miranda was, like, trying to think of how to, write a song for King George, in order to make him both a presence as well as relevant to the show. And the person that actually inspired him was Hugh Laurie. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, like, I know most people know Hugh Laurie from House. Like, that's how most Americans know him. But Hugh Laurie was actually, like, a comedian when he started. Like, he was on the Blackadder show. He worked, like, that was, like, one of the first things he did in his career. So he was, like, this young little innocent actor surrounded by all these big-time, like, comedians. So you can see where he learned, like, his acting chops and everything. So there was an episode of House where Lin was a guest star and they were hanging out. They were friends and everything. And he consulted him because, Hugh Laurie's British. So he said, I'm trying to figure out how to do a song that, the King of England would sing, but I want it to be like sort of comedic and lighthearted. And Hugh Laurie, like, without even thinking, he's just like, oh, you'll be back. Don't you worry. You'll see. You'll be back. And I just find that brilliant. Because if you ever heard Hugh Laurie's true Cockney accent, it is like the most hilarious thing ever. And I can just imagine him singing that whole song in himself, and it would be the best thing ever.
And when you think about it, like before we move on from King George, I think one thing you can also say about him is that his character, despite being, the villain at least for a brief time, he's kind of like the Greek chorus. He comes in, kind of explains what's going on, and then leaves, and kind of tells us where we are in time.
President John Adams, good luck.
I like how he sets the stage, because like you'll be back, but then once they're free, it's like, okay, so what comes next? Okay, bring it on to John Adams, and then Reynolds' pamphlet. He's just watching. It's like he is the Greek chorus. You're right. All right. Enough wild cards. Let's move on to Hamilton's friends, starting with Marquis de Lafayette, played by Daveed Diggs, who also plays Thomas Jefferson. We can probably just do him as a twofer here. Mm-hmm. For those who don't know, Daveed Diggs was also Sebastian in the latest live-action Little Mermaid, and it's night and day. I think he does a fantastic job, and like I said, he's the only one who's professionally trained in rap, and the fact that he's able to rap so quickly, and he brings probably the most character out of these characters, because when he's Lafayette, he showcases the growth of Lafayette from, a France immigrant who comes over and wants to, help the French people, and then he dreams of a life without a monarchy, and it takes him a while to kind of find the words for it, but then he's in the trenches and he starts rapping out these bars, and it's like,
oh, this motherfucker's spitting,
and he's spitting straight fire. And then he goes over to France to do his own thing. Thomas Jefferson comes back, and he has a completely different candor. He's all over the place, like, oh man, I'm the best. I'm French. I know what I'm doing. So I think this is probably my favorite physical performance, because Daveed just sells whatever role he's in. When we're talking specifically about Lafayette, I think he does a great job of playing this underdog, of sticking with Hamilton and being this really great friend to him. But when Thomas Jefferson, he's completely at odds, and he has to show it in his facial expressions. He has to say what, he's popping off, but he still has these facial expressions. It's I don't agree with that Hamilton guy, and I really like what they do with him, Kat.
Oh yeah, he's honestly one of my favorite characters in this, both in his portrayal and the dual performance that he gives. And he has such great energy, just seeing him dancing about and singing real fast and everything. It's such a delight, and he works so well with everybody around him. It's really amazing, and especially to think this is one of the first theater gigs he ever did. So yeah, the fact that his career's blown up so much from this, he deserves it, obviously. I do again, the dual roles he plays, because, you have Marquis de Lafayette, who is basically the unspoken hero of the revolution. He was a guy from France who came over to help allies in America. It's because of him that America won the war, that they won their freedom from England. And he only did it, under the promise that they would help him free his country, and, typical Americans, we screwed him over. And granted, he still was able to accomplish a lot on his end, and he, died in his country a hero. He was very well renowned. But I'm glad that he was able to portray him in a way that was so likable that made people realize, hey, we should pay this guy his dues. This is America's hero that nobody talks about, and he's a French immigrant. But then on the opposite spectrum...
Immigrants, we get the job done.
Hell yeah. But then on the opposite spectrum, he plays Thomas Jefferson, who, despite being, beloved as one of, like, the best U.S. presidents we've ever had, was a deeply, deeply flawed individual who did many horrible things, many questionable things. And it's like, yes, he did good stuff too, but it's hard to overlook the atrocities he committed. And the fact that he portrays him as being, such like a celebrity who thinks he can get away with stuff, and now he's headbutting with this one person who is like trying to constantly get in his way. It's like, again, it's night and day. Like, see it all. On one side, he's the guy's best friend, and they have all these things in common. And on the other side, he's his greatest enemy, and he's constantly trying to screw him over. And he plays both roles just so well. You gotta love it.
Fun fact, while I was listening to the same podcast that talked about the story, it was really nice because, like, they have these historians talk about it. They're like, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington had a feud near the end of their life, and Thomas Jefferson came to pay his respects, and Martha Washington said that the second worst day of her life, the first was Washington's death, the second was Jefferson coming over and paying his respects because he treated Washington so badly. That's the kind of person Jefferson was.
Yeah, like, so many historians like to overlook that, they say, like, well, because of him, we have the Louisiana Purchase, and, this, and that, and it's like, yeah, what about the fact he was a slave owner, that he had several children with an underage slave of his and didn't even bother to free her upon his passing? What about all these other, like, atrocities he's committed over time? It's like, nobody ever likes to bring that up, and yet this guy's one of the faces on Mount Rushmore. He has a statue in Washington, and he's on our money, and it's just like, dude, he was a jerk, and I'm glad the play acknowledges that, yes, he was a jerk. And in some senses, he is justified in his way of thinking, because at least when they were voting on whether or not to help France, he wanted to help France. Because he acknowledged that, it's because of them America won the war. He tried to push for them to make good on that promise. And Hamilton, in an act of backstabbing to maintain his position, totally turns on his former friend. Because in his eyes, it's just, like, not financially feasible. So in that case, you can't help but
also the reign of terror was
Jefferson.
going on at the time, so...
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I can certainly see, like, that one of my friends was like, look, everything's in turmoil. They don't have anything established in their own country. They have to focus on that first. But they still could have sent aid to Lafayette. And I feel like having, like, an official neutrality while still sending aid would have helped. It's just my position on the matter is, like, they helped you got to help him. Like, you got to do that. But at the same time, they definitely, like, their country was still not built up yet. So, like, they do have to pay attention. It's kind of a problem that America has today where we spent too much time overseas instead of on ourselves. But that's my thing. Doug.
Well, I want to open by saying it took over a century, but when the Americans came over to France in World War I, they said, Lafayette, we are here. So it took a while, but we finally did pay him back. Eventually, yeah. We never forgot him. But yeah, I mean, how can you forget Lafayette? It's like Lawrence dies at the end of Act 1, at the end of the Revolution, and he doesn't really get brought up again until like the very end of the play. Hannibal winds. We don't even know what happens to him. Hercules Mulligan, Hercules Mulligan, we don't even know what happens to him after Act 1. But at least not only, do you, mention Lafayette, you have a character with a tie to him that's played by the same actor. So it's like, it's kind of especially it stings a lot more when David Diggs' Jefferson comes out and says, "Have you forgot Lafayette? Have you an ounce of regret?" It's like that. Holy cow.
Yeah, like that hurts, and it's like David plays it so well to the point where like you feel the sting. And Hamilton's like, "Oh, let's talk to King Louis's head. Oh wait, he's super dead." I'm like, that doesn't matter.
I mean, they're both right. Let's not beat around the bush. It's like, yes, you should not have ignored Lafayette and, tried at least some way to help. But yes, the timing of it would have been really bad. You would have gotten involved in just utter chaos. It would have been basically like going into Vietnam. So yeah.
So it's a lose-lose, but at the same time, I feel like aid should have been given at some point. But like, I don't forget Lafayette. Anything to add before we move on to the next two?
I do remember seeing a story on Adam Ruins Everything about an instance where Lafayette actually saved a person, and it was actually a slave. So I can't find the name. The name escapes me at the moment, but I believe his name is John. So he was one of the few slaves that actually wanted to help the colonists, win the revolution. And this was rare, see, because at the time they wanted to keep slavery while England wanted to abolish it. So it was more in the slaves' interest to help England than it was the colonists. But for some reason, he did the opposite. So secretly, he would work in these English camps, and he would be present during war meetings. And of course, these people, the English soldiers and generals and stuff, assumed that because he was a slave, he couldn't read or write, or he had no connection, so that he wouldn't tell anybody what they were doing. So he was actually able to smuggle a lot of information over to the colonists and help win a lot of battles. Unfortunately, after the battle was run, despite the fact that they promised they would free him afterwards, they negated on that, and he fought for years to try to get his freedom. And actually, it was Lafayette who vouched for him, because when he first met him, he saw that the man had potential, that he knew how to read and write and everything. So he would send him on a lot of these missions and took a liking to him. So when word got back to Lafayette that the slave had not been freed and they were refusing to, he vouched on his behalf and demanded his freedom. So the man actually got his freedom because of Lafayette. And in fact, when he was able to change his name to show that he was now a free slave, he took on the last name Lafayette. Like, that is how great of a man he was.
Mm-hmm. And let's not beat around the bush. The slave trade was an awful practice. And the fact that the founding fathers wanted to keep it going for even longer, for most of them, was just despicable. It's just a very black stain in our history. I should say dark stain in our history. Sorry, I didn't mean that.
A blight on our history.
It's a very big blight in our history. It's a dark mark, and we need to atone for that. Moving on, we have Hercules Mulligan and James Madison, both played by, oh god, I don't want to butcher the name. I think it's Okiriete Onaduan.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to pronounce that name either.
Yeah, I'm just gonna try Okiriete Onaduan.
You call him 00. 007.
I think
because he was a spy.
I love this performance for a couple major reasons. One, this is the one that I didn't notice at first, because some of these you can tell, like Thomas Jefferson and Lafayette, they have different cadence, but you can tell. But here, I didn't know it was the same person until like after the play, and I'm just like, oh wow, because they do it such a good job. Because Hercules Mulligan is in your face. He is living large. He's so big and so crass, whereas James Madison is reserved and sickly, and it's so different and so interesting, especially because James Madison's also opposing Hamilton alongside Jefferson, and who's the one who's from the South, and it's just so interesting. I think it's well done, Kat.
Yeah, again, this is another role that is great in both how the actor portrays the duality of the characters. Because, like you said, first you have someone who's a little on the poorer side, who's loud and obnoxious, but at the same time, he has these great skills as a spy and everything, and it's because of the info he passes on, having spied on the British soldiers, that he's able to help win the war. And like he clearly has like no fear, like no reservation when it comes to his involvement with the revolution. Meanwhile, you have James Madison, you know, a known slave owner, a heavily pro-South proponent who is doing everything in his power to keep it so that the South has like their individual rights and keeps the rights to own slaves. And he basically like pleads with Jefferson to like help him maintain that state, and of course because Jefferson is about equally as awful person, he of course helps him. And granted, you know, James Madison has done some good things. Clearly he helped Hamilton write the Federalist Papers and everything. He wrote the Bill of Rights, but
which I wrote.
But still, like, you know that this guy is up to no good. You know that he is purely in everything for his own self-interest. Like, it is all his own self-interest. So, yeah, seeing the juxtaposition of the two characters and how easily he's able to portray them, again, it's just as impressive as when Daveed Diggs does Lafayette and Jefferson.
Mm-hmm. Doug?
Yeah, like you said, it is very night and day. I think with this is the one character. It's like you have like complete, you know, difference between you know, which side they're on in Act 1 and Act 2, and you have like you said, the very in your face and like very harsh voice of Hercules Mulligan, and then you have the reserved kind of you know, softer tone of James Madison. So it is such complete duality of a character that, yeah, I mean, you gotta give you know, all of the praise on that. Obviously he doesn't have quite the same, you know, you don't remember him as well as Lafayette or Lawrence, but when he's there, he makes an impact.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's not as much to say about these two characters because while there is duality, they don't cross over, because Hercules Mulligan helps in the Revolutionary War but doesn't come to the second half. James Madison doesn't really show up much until the second half. It's, you hear them in conversation, but like a lot of it is the performance, and I think they did a fantastic job. I am sorry for butchering names. This is one that I could not pronounce. Anything else before we move on to the final duo of the friends?
I did want to point out one thing though. Again, this plays into the whole like criticism that people have about, you know, founding fathers and revolutionary people being played by people of color. One thing like that should be known about Hercules Mulligan is that he did indeed own slaves. He owned a slave, and in fact, that slave was the one that actually did the real spy work. He had a slave named Cato who, like I mentioned, what that other slave did, he would go undercover into British-held territories, and he would spy on them. He would read all of like their strategies and stuff, and he would pass it on to the army. He's the one that like is the true like spy here. And when you think about it, they kind of combine those two characters together for the stage play. It's a shame that they never like acknowledge him fully, and for a while his like fate was unknown. I think they do say eventually he was granted his freedom for his service, but not much else is known about him. But the fact that the character, you know, led to us researching and finding out about him, I think lends some credence, because otherwise you wouldn't have known his story otherwise.
Yeah, I think that the play is trying to bring light to these stories. I do feel, though, that, like, it does take away from the actual voice of the character, the real life person. You know, this is the one where it could be a little bit problematic, and I don't think it's on purpose. It's just this is how it was condensed and portrayed, because you don't have a lot of time. Even though this is a long play, like, you don't have every single scene matters. So this, I will agree with you in that one. It is a little bit problematic in that regard. Okay, moving on to the final member of the friend group, we have John Lawrence, played by Anthony Ramos, who also plays Philip Hamilton. I really like him, but there's not really... I think Lawrence is probably the most forgettable about the Friends, unfortunately, because, you know, his whole thing is, like, he wants to end slavery, and I like that. I think that's really cool. He wants to create the first Black Battalion. That's really cool. But, you know, he dies in service. In between, though, like, you don't see as much of him as Mulligan or Lafayette. He doesn't do as much in parts of the war until he goes off on his own. And I think that kind of is a detriment. Now, granted, the fact that he dies really affects Hamilton, and it's why he, you know, starts to neglect his son, and why, you know, while see Philip in him, like, ultimately the tragic loss of his son is partly due to the loss of Lawrence as well. So, like, there is really good thematic parallels, but I'm gonna be honest, first act, until I looked it up again, I forgot his name. I'm sorry, Kat.
Oh, don't let the fangirl hear you say that. Yeah, no lie, again, because I freak with the fanfic community. Like, Hamilton gets shipped more with Lawrence than anybody else in this fandom, like, even more so than Jefferson.
I've heard it, I've seen it, like, Lawrence, I like you a lot, like, yeah. I don't know.
Here's the thing, though. There might actually be some credence to that. There might actually be some substantial evidence, because based on what I read of John Lawrence's history, it was heavily, heavily implied he might have been gay, or at the very least bisexual, and he clearly had a crush on Hamilton who might have reciprocated. Because when they looked at letters between them, they noticed that there was oddly romantic language between the two of them. Like, nothing too overt to give it away, but enough where it makes you question it. And honestly, I buy it. Because, you know, clearly their friendship, like, the way it's portrayed, it means a lot. And they don't really shy away from that in the play either. You can see that he definitely bonds more with Lawrence than he does with the other two. But the sheer fact that he's devastated when Lawrence dies, like, that changes Hamilton. That makes him just throw himself completely into his work, trying to accomplish everything that both he and Lawrence had wished for the country. And
that is emotional. That is brilliant.
Mm-hmm. And with Lawrence, like, he's basically the embodiment of no good deed goes unpunished, because both his characters, they get into the situation they do for noble reasons, but because of how circumstances play out, they unfairly die, like, long before their time. And it really is a shame, because, like, John Lawrence, he wanted to, like, make the first all-black battalion. He did want to free slaves, and this is really saying something, because the real John Lawrence, his father was a slave owner. They profited off of slave labor and everything, and Lawrence himself actually grew up privileged in England. But his loyalties was always to the colonies. So when the war started, he left everything behind to go fight for them. To go, you know, fight and free the slaves and everything. Like, he even ditched his wife who was pregnant at the time. And you can tell in his letters he really did not care about his family whatsoever, that he was clearly forced into this marriage. So, you know, he pretty much, like, gave his all for his country. And he literally died on, like, the last day of the revolution. He just had to hold out for one day and he couldn't do it.
The revolution had already ended, and that's the tragedy. And, like, I think what works... Well, I feel like John Lawrence gets the least amount of attention. His emotion that's brought forth is palpable. It's the most out of anyone. When he and Philip died, Like, both those scenes, I was bawling. Like, I was sobbing, especially because, like, the way they built up Philip. Now, granted, I've said it before, I don't think him playing a 9-year-old works as well as anything else, but, like, that's just one little thing because his death is so poignant. And it works on so many levels. Thematically, these two people tragically taken before their time, given wrong advice. Their friends tried to help them but couldn't. It's a great, fantastic pairing, and I think Anthony Ramos does fantastic job. Doug.
Going back to our thing about us saying that Lawrence and Hamilton might have had a thing. Apparently, the play is inaccurate in that John Lawrence did not attend the wedding of Hamilton and Elizabeth Schuyler. So that could lend more to he was jealous, of Hamilton being with somebody else and, just being completely jolted about it. But yeah, no, it's very clear that, they were very close and that his death certainly affected Hamilton. And, made him kind of bury himself in it and really try to work toward what, he and Lawrence had been trying to achieve. Yeah, I'm with you. The play doesn't really do that good of a job of shining a light on him and kind of makes him forgettable in both roles, really. Obviously, to have him die in both the roles that are, significant to Alexander Hamilton, it's like, really, that's about all you kind of remember about him.
Would you say it's a woman in the fridge type situation?
It kind of is.
It is. It's a reverse fridging. And granted, like, Women in Refrigerators was created, for those who don't know, Kyle Rayner in comics, the Green Lantern, found his wife dead, stuffed in a fridge. It was all for his own character development. The writers just killed her off. Now, these are real life people. So it's a little bit different. It does feel a little bit reverse fridging that we don't get enough info about these characters who were more important to Hamilton than some of these other figures. Like Hercules Mulligan is probably less important, even though the stuff that he did was important. So it's like, I feel like if we had gotten more about his son, if we gotten a little bit more about John Lawrence, then I wouldn't, but it does feel like a reverse fridging.
Well, it's hard to really get much on people that died so young, though. That's the problem here. And I mean, their whole thing was like, purpose being in the play was, in regards to Hamilton. And I mean, and granted, like, Hamilton wasn't responsible for Lawrence dying in the first one. I mean, in fact, he tells him during his duel with General Lee, don't throw away your shot. And I mean, thank God he didn't, because, he survived that battle. I mean, you could argue that, that ended up with Hamilton suffering consequences, but it wasn't that bad in the grand scheme of things. And I mean, Lawrence was going to end up going to South Carolina regardless, because that's where his true battle, lied. Yeah. But with his son, it's clearly that was all his fault. I mean, he basically passed on his sense of pride to his son so that, he went seeking the duel. He went seeking it against an opponent that clearly had no qualms with shooting him down, and he operated under the assumption that, the other guy would throw away his shot too, and he ultimately paid for that price. So yes, like, this does ultimately just serve to, like, push Hamilton more over the edge in terms of, like, how downhill his life has gotten. But even then, I mean, he's still not a completely forgettable character. Like, he's still there. He still sort of influences how certain thing goes about. It's a shame because he's basically a tragic character. He's just there to die. Like, no matter how you look at it.
I don't think it's awful. I mean, granted, this is a fantastic play, no matter what I say, but, like, I feel like this is probably one of the weaker points, personally. It's not the acting, it's just, I feel like, had they had another scene with either of these characters, it would have helped flesh out maybe a little bit. Alright, moving the opposite direction, a character who we all know, he needs no introduction.
Here comes the general.
Here comes the general.
Ladies
Here
and
comes the
gentlemen,
general.
the moment you've been waiting for.
We are outgunned.
What?
Outmanned. So George Washington, played by Christopher Jackson, is the underrated star of this show. I love Hamilton. I love Burr. I think they're fantastic, and I think Angelica Schuyler also deserves so much praise. But George Washington, played by Christopher Jackson, is peak. And it's because not only is he able to like pull off the seriousness, he has the softness. And his voice is so like angelic. There's no other way to put it, because he has two of my favorite songs in the film, History Has Its Eyes on You and Teach Them How to Say Goodbye. And every time he says it, like, people don't give him enough credit. Kat showed me a video of him singing The Story of Tonight with Elmo. And it's just so wonderful and wholesome. And just like, every time I hear his voice, I'm like, I kind of want to hear, I want him to be a star of something. Like, he's so good. He's so good, Kat.
He wasn't in The Heights, Lin-Manuel's first big production, and he was one of the major characters too, so he's definitely gotten his limelight before. But I agree, he definitely shines as Washington in this. And he acknowledges, the flaws of the character. Because, yes, George Washington was one of our, the founding father. He was the first general, first president, first a lot of things. He accomplished a lot. And he was humble enough to realize that he did not want to stay president for more than 4 years. So there's a lot of kudos to give the man. But at the same time, he's also a deeply flawed character. I mean, it's no mystery that he owned slaves. He would kidnap people to be a part of his army. He would kill those people if they tried to desert said army. He did basically whatever it took to win this war, and he did. But with this, it's like, you see the more, worn down side of him, because, all of his character development pretty much already happened. When he's talking to Hamilton, you could see just how tired he is, how worn down he is, how he is trying his best with the bare minimum he is given. And there are times where it seems like he almost is giving up hope, but he sticks with it. He hangs in there, and he is doing his best to be the moral compass for Hamilton, because he sees himself in the guy, and he knows that he possesses some of his own flaws. So, on the one hand, he does give Hamilton his shot, being his first-hand man, and then later giving him his own command and everything. But you could tell he's also weary about Hamilton, getting too big for his britches, and he tries to warn him constantly, to rein himself in, to consider the bigger picture and everything. And truly, it's when he finally retires and leaves the play that Hamilton's life truly goes to shit, because he doesn't have his presence there to guide him anymore. And not that I'm saying the show suffers for it, but, it's just not the same once he's not, there anymore.
Yeah. George Washington is, a guiding hand in this. And what I love about it is, for the whole time, he's just, saying, okay, Lee is bad-mouthing him, and you don't, get why he's saying, I've been through worse, He keeps kind of brushing these things aside to focus on the bigger picture. And then he's just yeah, when I had my first command, I led my men into a massacre. I made every mistake. I'm not a perfect person. I'm not the hero that everyone should be looking up to. I'm just here to win the war. We can't win with infighting. And it's just the practicality is so great. But when he sings that History Has Its Eyes, especially during the nonstop portion with the leitmotif, and it's just I want to make one last stand and be the president and help this country. Also, during Teach Me How to Say Goodbye, when he starts singing portions of his letter, in my life, I am not conscious of any mistakes, but I know my own flaws enough to know that I possibly have made many mistakes. It's so beautiful to portray Washington as this deeply flawed person who recognizes it and is trying to do better. And it stands in great contrast to Hamilton and even Burr, where Hamilton is pushing too fast. Burr is not doing anything, and Washington is kind of a middle ground. Doug.
I absolutely love Christopher Jackson's portrayal of George Washington in this. I love how he comes off very tough but soft when he needs to, and how he's, though it's never really outright stated, he's kind of that father figure for Hamilton, the father he never had. And like I said,
I'm not your son.
It's never stated, but it's heavily hinted at. Like you said, he keeps calling him son. Keep calling me son one more time. Or Jefferson says, Daddy's calling. But yeah, it's very clear.
I am grown. I do not need you to, like, it's a daddy figure, yeah.
It's like, aside from Eliza, it's like, this is the one person who can actually have, like, some sort of control over Hamilton's actions, can actually, like, is trying to lead him on a good path, try to keep him grounded, sees his potential, and really wants him, don't die, that's just so easy and just cheap to do. You could do something that's actually worthwhile, something that could, lead to a career after the war is done. Don't
dying is easy, young
living
man.
is
living
harder.
is harder.
Yes. Oh God,
that's such a good quote.
And yeah, it's just like the constant, advice that he gives out. How he's just, and how when he goes, like Kat said, it's basically like that kind of leads more so than anything else to Hamilton just kind of throwing his life away because he loses that, father figure, that, direction in his life. It's like at this point, everybody else in politics, he has no friends. He has, nobody that really likes him, or, if they do, they're not in a position where they can be very helpful toward him. But it's like like I said, when Washington leaves, and that song, one last time, just it sends chills. It's sad for more than just we're losing Washington. Hamilton is losing one of the closest people in his life, basically, and just even in like death. How he's like the first person to come on afterward, with the reprise of History's Got His Eyes on You. Just, powerful.
All right, anything to add? Because we have one final group.
I mean, what else can you really say about Washington? He, like, in this version of him, he was awesome. And, like, yeah, everybody, I think, could use a Washington like that in their life.
All right. Finally, let's talk about the Schuyler sisters. Elizabeth Schuyler, played by Philippa Sue, who is Hamilton's wife. Angelica Schuyler, played by Renee Elise Goldsberry, who is kind of an intellectual meeting of the minds type lover to Hamilton. And Peggy, played by Jasmine Cephas Jones. Kat, what do you think?
Well, she's also another dual role. Don't forget.
Oh yeah, she's Maria Reynolds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
what do you think?
I love the Schuyler sisters. Like when you first come on, they're already portrayed as being, rebellious. Like, they like to travel into town. They like to pick up guys who, specifically guys who they see as intellectuals. Like, they disobey their father and just go out on their own terms. And they just want to, have fun and, get their minds enhanced and everything. And you really, as soon as they're on, it's, hard not to like them. And especially Angelica. You could tell, she is definitely a woman out of her time. Because she is just so smart, and she is so determined and so passionate. And, she knows what's going on. She knows what's what. And if she was ever given the proper opportunity, she could have become so much more than she ended up being. But, again, it was the wrong time period. But it's like, you sympathize with her right away, especially when she says how next time she sees Thomas Jefferson, she wants him to include women in the sequel. Like, that's perfect. And the thing is though, like with Angelica, she kind of overshadows Eliza at first. Because for those who like don't know history, if you're watching this play, you assume that Angelica is naturally going to be the love interest. She's the one who's going to end up with Hamilton because she's his intellectual equal and everything. But that's not what ends up happening. And so Eliza doesn't really get her chance to shine probably until the second act of the show, I want to say. And Eliza, for the most part, is content, just being there for Hamilton, being his wife, being a mother to his children, just doing what she can to support him. But it's not until he betrays her trust that she shows more of who she is, and it shows that she's not just, the obedient silent wife. No, she was pissed off. She cut him off. She was, willing to do whatever it takes just to have nothing to do with him. Like, literally removing herself from the narrative. But then once she does forgive him, and even after she loses both him and her son, she stays strong and she powers on. Like, she's like literally one of the last survivors of this group of people to actually pass on their legacies, to properly tell their stories. She did that all on her own, partially with help from her sister, but that she doesn't really get her dues until the very end. So, yeah, like, she's really an underrated character in all of this. Like, especially when you look at how much she managed to accomplish on her own after Hamilton died. And then Peggy is just there. Peggy is just
And Peggy.
And Peggy.
Yeah, like, she's just there to be, like, the younger sister that, like, follows them around. And even though she's, like, a naysayer, she still, like, does what they say and everything. I mean, she's just, I think, there mostly for moral support. Like, she doesn't really get her time to shine until she's Maria Reynolds, when, she's literally the person that is now just tearing Hamilton's family apart and betraying the women that were portrayed as her sisters. From what I heard, Maria Reynolds was actually a distant cousin of Eliza Hamilton, which makes it even worse because her own family basically betrayed her. So, yeah, like, I can't really say much to her performance, because again, she's just there just to be, like, the homewrecker, and she does her job adequately enough, but, like, there's really not much to say about that other than her character.
Yeah, when talking about Maria Reynolds and Peggy, like, they're very forgettable characters aside from what they contribute in terms of the duality of these two characters. Maria is there to wreck the marriage. The acting's good, it's just there's not really much to them. Angelica and Eliza, though, I loved them both, and I think both of them are fantastic. I love Angelica. I think she's the best woman singer in the show, hands down. Like, Satisfied, just all the songs that she belts out, and she does an amazing job without really overdoing it. And I like the subtle inflections when, like, during the Winter's Ball, she says one thing, and then during Satisfied, it rewinds and she says it slightly different way to show how different it means. And, like, she keeps writing these letters to Hamilton that are so interesting. And it's just, I think Renee does a fantastic job. One of the highlights of this play. Eliza, at first I was like, I wanted more of Angelica, but then, like, when we get to, like, the Stay Alive, that would be enough. And, when she starts talking about all the stuff she does, like, I Want You to Burn is probably one of my favorite songs of hers, because, like, she really takes control of the narrative and takes charge and does something that a woman in her station at the time probably wouldn't have normally done. And then it ends on her, like, she wants to try to understand Hamilton more. Like, she understands he was a deeply flawed person, and she doesn't forgive him, but she wants to understand him. And, like, she starts the orphanage up, and, like, it's one of the best scenes in the play. I think both of these contribute so much to the story, to the narrative, to this play in general. I don't think I could do it justice, because, like, they are almost main characters in their own right, even though they aren't. Doug.
I mean, I have with the Schuyler sisters, it's a little weird because it's like where we have an implied potential romance between John Lawrence and Alexander Hamilton, but like nothing really comes of that in the play. We kind of, have to, stick that with Angelica Schuyler in order to keep her in the rest of the play and basically like run with that premise, which it has its moments, but on the whole, I feel like it does get very old quick. It's like we're just kind of shoehorning potential, love side stories into it. But obviously, he misses Angelica when she decides to take somebody else and go across the sea. So, it's hardly going to see her again. But yeah, it's like Kath said. Otherwise, she's this very smart, very would-be powerful woman if she were living in a different time. But it is fun to see her, in Looking for a Mind at Work. But yeah, aside from that, it's like she doesn't really have much going until, after the Reynolds pamphlet and everything falls apart. And then it's like, she turns on Alexander Hamilton to say what Eliza can't quite say yet. In that, you flew too close to the sun. You've kind of ruined everything. Forget what we had. That's gone. But yeah, that's kind of all I really have to say about Angelica. Really, the powerhouse is Eliza, played by Philippa Sue. Because she starts off helpless. She's the middle child, or at least that's how she's portrayed in this. And then she is the one that winds up, getting married to the, person she kind of wants to be with. But it does turn into, an actual relationship. She and Alexander do, have a genuine love between them, you can see. And of course, obviously, it's really tested when the Reynolds pamphlet comes out. And, that's when is, don't, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And she's like resolved to burn everything that he ever wrote her, to, remove herself from that narrative, because she can't outright divorce him because it would probably look bad for, for his career and, for their family. And everybody knows that Alexander Hamilton was wrong, so it's like, but...
Not to mention it wasn't doable at that point in time.
But let's, then to have her, feel so much grief over losing Philip that she winds up going against her better nature and reconciling with Alexander. And just, after he dies, she just resolves to take on everything that he wanted to get accomplished, that he didn't have the time for. And, she dedicates the remainder of her life, which is 50 years, which you don't see people live that long back then. So it's, you got to give her all the credit. And I love it. It sends chills down my spine at the end when, she, puts herself
when she
back
says,
in the narrative.
The orphanage.
Yeah. It's just like...
That always makes me cry when they get to that point.
Yeah.
And then there's Peggy.
All right. And then
she's just a non-entity.
Is there anything more you want to say about the sisters before I move it on? I have a couple other points to discuss related to what you just said. So
I will say narratively, like, it's interesting that you have like this character like an Angelica who is obviously built up to be like the main female love interest, and yet that doesn't happen. It's like, yes, they
Hmm.
have like a bit of, a flirtation, and they have a deep friendship. You might say it's bordering on emotional infidelity or something like that. But that's as far as it ever goes. Like, I'll be honest, the first time I watched this, I half expected something to happen to Eliza, like she would die suddenly, and then Angelica would become his new wife, or that he would end up cheating on Eliza with Angelica. But no, that doesn't happen. In fact, like, he cheats on her with the other version of her sister. So,
And Peggy.
yeah, and then like Angelica ends up turning on him as well because he basically cheated on her as well, and we don't really ever see her forgive him at all. So for all we know, she went to her grave like not really forgiving him, but doing so for her sister's sake. But I found it interesting because you don't really see plays or movies that often where you have a character like that who just doesn't get the guy. Like, the closest I could think of is maybe Les Mis, where they have what was her name, the girl that was going after Math.
Eponine?
Yeah, Eponine, where she's going after the guy she's had this long friendship with, and he ends up with Cosette instead, who he's only known for like a day. And you're thinking, like, well, why doesn't he go with Eponine? She's clearly the better choice. She has more of a presence than Cosette has, but yet, she ends up, like, dying during that battle. So, yeah, like, that's pretty much one of the only times I could think of where, like, that actually happens. And, I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, they still show the relationship regardless. They show them connecting and everything, and, like, the influence they had on each other. But I just find that really unique, especially for a play like this.
I find it interesting that they portray all the different things, showcasing, taking jabs at Alexander's attention. Like, he has things pulling him in different directions. Lauren's is more an emotional connection, whereas Angelica is more an intellectual connection. And then there's Eliza, who is a status symbol. And, like, while he does love her, and it's very clear he does, it's almost like he settles for her in the Winter's Ball. And, there's a lot of interesting stuff about Alex that's shown through there, personally, that I see. All right. I'm going to move this over to my next main point. We're going to talk about songs, but we talked a little bit about the song called Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story. It's the ending song of the play, and it's one of the biggest themes of this entire play. I've hinted at it, but, like, so much of this narrative is about who gets to tell your story. You don't get to control it, and it's, we're seeing this, like, Lin is the one getting to tell us this story. He wrote it, he played it. He's aware that the facts were altered, but he got to tell the story of someone who he was intrigued by. In the same way, Eliza tells Washington's story. Throughout this play, telling a narrative is what's important. And I wanted to posit a question: is it important how a story is written, or is it important that the story is told at all? Like, in History Has Its Eyes on You, we're told that, you don't get to decide who lives, who dies, who tells your story, and that history will ignore the good and paint some people as villains while others will be the heroes. Is it important that, things are accurate, or that the story is told, like Washington with the Washington Monument? Doug?
I think it very much depends. Obviously, is the story worth telling to begin with? Is it worth recording, for future generations to learn about? Will it be interesting? That's the sort of thing that, ultimately defines whether or not we want to record what happens in history. And obviously, some things are lost to time. some things just people don't really care about. I mean, when you think about it, you know, a lot of people these days they just don't have the attention span to really go back unless you're really a devoted, you know, history buff, you know, interested in the subject. I mean, let's face it, a lot of us, when you know, before seeing Hamilton, we only knew that, you know, Hamilton was this guy who founded the Treasury, got in a fight with Aaron Burr and wound up getting shot, and now he's on the $10 bill. That's, you know, and now we have something that, you know, tells his story, even if there are liberties to it, but we have a better idea of who he was. We're actually more interested in his story. So, like I said, it very much depends on, you know, how interesting the story is, if it is worth being saved for future generations or not.
As a wise man once said, don't let the facts get in the way of telling a good story, kid. Julie, do the thing. Kat.
Yeah, that song, like, every time at the end, it always makes me cry one way or another. Because it's so, like, perspective and narrative is just so important. Like, everybody has their own vision of what happened. Some people will put a more positive spin on it. Some people will put a more negative. The whole point is, like, you can't control the narrative no matter how hard you try. It's like, yes, you can write things how you think they should have happened or how they could have happened, but ultimately somebody's gonna have their own version. Nothing's gonna be right. Like, the best you can do is just live your life the way that you want to the best of your abilities. And I mean, that's clearly what Hamilton tried to do. And yes, he obviously stumbled along the way, and clearly a lot of his mistakes, some of which were more well known than others, more so than his accomplishments, but all you need is, like, the right people to tell what good things you did in order to, like, let it be known. Because some things are worth noting. You know, some things are worth going down in history. So, again, it's all about just seeing everything from a different perspective. And it makes me, like, so happy, you know, that it's Eliza at the end who's telling everything that, like, happened, how she tried to preserve not just her husband's legacy, but Washington and Lawrence, and how she tried to pass on their beliefs in their stead. Like, it's nothing short of noble. And the fact that she also gets acknowledged as such for her own efforts is important. Like, the fact that, you know, they show that she was the one who started the first private orphanage. Like, that was important, and that was something a lot of people didn't know. And in fact, after this play happened, there was a lot of donations going to that orphanage, which, you know, is amazing. So really, in hindsight, legacy does matter. You know, as long as you get people interested, the right things will always get acknowledged when the time is right.
And also, what is the cardinal rule of history? Those who do not learn from the past are doomed to repeat it.
And don't make a land war in Asia.
Or Russia.
Or anywhere in Europe, really. But like, it really gets me every time when Washington sings at the end that she tells his story, like, and it's important. And this is the 100th episode of the Disney debate, so this is kind of one of the things I wanted to bring up at the end, because we have touched upon nearly 100 Disney films, and in the process, we have seen quite a few stinkers, but we've seen quite an interesting amount of stories. But I think there's been merit in the bad and the good. Disney is often known for taking such liberties with stories that people get so upset because it wasn't told the way they wanted it to be told. But I think what draws so many to Disney is that they paint a specific version of a tale. Snow White is not the grim fairy tale version. It's happy because people needed to be happy at the time. When we had all the adventure stuff, I might not like the adventure era, but I think it speaks to a people who wanted to see more than what was around them at the time. And this, to me, is why this is not technically a Disney film when you actually think about it, but it really fits in with that Disney brand where it's like, does it tell everything of the story? It takes liberties, yes, but it deserves to be told. And it's something that I've kind of come to grips with over the past, couple of years, is that like some of the older Disney debates that I was really kind of like, I didn't like, maybe I'll go and take a second look at them. Maybe. I feel like there are stories here that do deserve to be told. And I feel like when we were watching Moon Pilot or even Babes in Toyland, it shed light on a story that I would never have seen beforehand. And it told it in such a unique way that I'm still thinking about it years to come. Say what you will about The Reluctant Dragon, but I'm still thinking about it, you know? All these years later, I'm still thinking about The Reluctant Dragon, and I'm still thinking about how these films made me feel.
Which was that
so
you wanted to kick a chicken.
Exactly. And that's how Wish made me feel too. I think what these films and what stories get right in that it's not about whether or not it deserves to be told. It's, can you tell it in a way that is interesting, that can outlive the story itself? We're still talking about Hamilton so much time after the play came out. It's been nearly, it's been nearly 10 years. Just think about that, since the play came out. And time marches on, and yet we're still talking about it. And I think there's merit in all of that. Okay. Anything else to add, Kat, Doug?
No, I agree. Like, it's been wild, like, all the stuff we've been exposed to. 'Cause, like, I'm a self-proclaimed Disney fan and stuff, but clearly I haven't seen a lot of the things that we reviewed up to this point. You know, stuff that's been lost to time and everything. But the impressions they leave, like, yeah, it's really, like, crazy to think, like, the mindset, see the evolution and the storytelling and everything from Snow White up until the period
Scorpion
we're at now.
Hoedown.
Scorpion Hoedown. But, like, we've had some good times, though, and I've enjoyed the hell out of it. Like, that's why I keep coming back to do this, because I'm always interested in the next new movie or show that I've never seen before. And, like, my goal is to see everything. I know I'll probably be old and gray if we ever get to that point, but even then, it still, like, has warrant to me, because, like, there are stories out there. There could be good stories. There could be horrible stories, but the point is they exist, and I want to get to know every one of them. Like, that's the power of having, like, a good narrative and a good ability for storytelling. So I look forward to the next 100 episodes that we get to review and talk about.
100 more. Anything, Doug, before I bring us to our last 2 points of the night?
Yeah, I pretty much being on this journey with you, even if I haven't seen every single one of the films, there's always something to take away, even from, like, the worst film. It's like, there's something, so bad about it that it leaves us, joking about it. Like, the Reluctant Dragon was so bad, you want to kick a chicken. Or maybe, there's something that didn't hit us quite that way, but, there's a story to be told from behind the scenes of how it was made, and there's something interesting that comes from that.
The poop dress in Cinderella.
Yeah. It's like, the Babes in Toyland adaptation they did, it wasn't great, but you look at the technical aspects of it, and it's like, this film it looks so good and has so many effects to it that it's much better than it has any right to be for that time. So yeah, there's definitely something to be said about, the legacy of all these films, of all these stories, even if it's not, the
Mhm.
story itself that we've been focusing on. If, you look at the person behind the main character, and you see, just what they contributed to making this, happen, making this as remembered or not remembered as it is.
Hey,
All
Zen.
right.
Hey,
Yeah.
Zen. Till we're
Yeah.
90. You'll get that joke when you finally watch Deadpool.
Okay. I need to see Deadpool and Wolverine. I need to see Inside Out 2. There's some good stuff on the horizon. Before we move on, we wanted to talk about the songs, but like looking at them right now, there's 47 songs in Hamilton. It'd be impossible to talk about every single one. We did talk about a lot of them. I would like to bring it to each person to give like some of their favorites and some of their least favorite. Doug, you first. Favorite, least favorite songs.
Oh, my top favorite is definitely The Room Where It Happened. It is just such a jaunty thing, and it's like it's that turning point for where Aaron Burr finally basically drops all pretense, and I don't want to say that he becomes the villain, but he basically becomes the bad guy at the end of it, because it's like he you see also in kind of a reverse of things, you see that Aaron Burr, that Alexander Hamilton finally listens to Burr, and it's like he talks less, smiles more, and he acts but keeps things close to his chest as to what his motives are, and just the way it kind of repeats, and it's kind of like this sort of ominous feeling to things, but it's action. I can't quite put into words exactly why I love it so much, but it's just such a great song. I focus on it more than any of the other songs in Hamilton, and I like a lot of the songs in the show. The same I can't be said is like what's the hang on, I can't even remember the name of it. Oh, Farmer Refuted, I think, is my least favorite song. Just because, I mean, it has that purpose of the other side, the loyalists talking, and then Hamilton arguing with them, but it's like you're just waiting for the better song that comes next, which is You'll Be Back. So it just, I don't know, it kind of frustrates me, and it's also kind of tonally different from all the other songs.
Cat.
You're gonna make me choose. Ugh, God.
Choose between my babies. There's so many songs.
Oh my God, there's so many. Like, it's so hard for me to choose what my favorite is. All right. In terms of solo songs, I should say, like, God, even that's hard. But if I had to choose, like, for solo songs, it's a 3-way tie between Wait For It by Aaron Burr, Satisfied by Angelica, and Burn by Eliza. Because, like, they each, like, convey, they're both soliloquies, basically, and, like, both proclaiming, like, how they're feeling at this moment in regards to where they are at that point in their lives. And yeah, a lot of it's in association to Hamilton, but a lot of it's also about their own wants and desires too. Like Burr saying how he wants to make a name for himself and how he feels like he has to pass on his family's legacy, but he wants to do it in his own way and is trying to do it different from Hamilton, even if he knows it's not as effective. You have Angelica saying how she, like, at the same time is glad but also laments having passed on Hamilton and is not marrying him. It's clear that, she wants her sister to be happy first and foremost, and she feels it's more to her advantage to marry someone more rich than him. But at the same time, he's the only person that's been on her own intellectual level, and she kind of, like, misses not having seized that opportunity. And then finally with Eliza, like I said, that is her big moment where she finally becomes her own character, where she realizes how much the man she loved has betrayed her. And she is now like trying everything she can to just remove him from her life so she can focus on herself, her family, and just, you know, stay away from all the negativity and stuff. So it's really hard to choose between the three of those. And then in terms of like the choir numbers, again, so tough. It is so tough. But I guess if it came down to it, if I had to choose, it would probably be Nonstop, which is like the big showstopper before Act 1 ends. Just because, like, it acts as both like a montage of history at that point, you know, after the war is over, what all the characters are going through up to that point before we get to Act 2. But it's like, it's such a whirlwind of things, and it's just, you know, Hamilton realizing that, you know, he has to do more for his friends that didn't make it through the war, that he has to do more to raise his status, to get what he wants accomplished, that at this point, history truly now has its eyes on him. And it's just like him, again, you know, the characters pointing out, why do you write like you're running out of time? And that's because he literally feels like that's what's happening now. He has so little time now to just get these things accomplished, which, as we all know, he truly does. So, yeah, again, those are my picks. It is so tough, though, because the other songs, you know, Schuyler Sisters, Yorktown, God, they're all so good. It's so hard to choose. Why do you make me choose, then?
Because I'm evil. I didn't wash my hand. No, I did. What's your least favorite?
There's honestly not much I could say I dislike, but I guess if I had to pick, it would probably be Say No to This, where, you know, he actively cheats on his wife. Because again, not only is this like a heartbreaking scene that you're seeing him betray both Eliza and Angelica for this random woman, but like him singing throughout it is like him trying to justify why he's having this affair. And he kind of like infantiles Maria a little, like saying, oh, she looks so helpless. Like, how could I say no? And it's like, dude, she's a grown-ass woman who clearly is seducing you. You just don't want to admit that you got horny and didn't care who you boinked at this point. Like, it kind of is infuriating, especially when it gets to the point where he's being blackmailed. And yes, I get he had to pay it in order to keep it on the down low, but he could have stopped, but he continues. It's like, we don't know when he stopped exactly. Like, they imply it's been a few years, but even then, it's infuriating, because you're supposed to like Hamilton, and this is easily one of the most egregious things that he does, you know, right before the rental pamphlet happens. So,
and it is not his best singing. Now, that's purposefully done, but, like, still, it's, on my end, I'm going to be a little bit swerve. I think Washington on Your Side is one of my favorites, because it shows Thomas Jefferson at his peak. It shows like the layers to his character, because like he shows that like he sees the corruption in the system, and it's like, if I'm here, I'm complicit in this, which is why, like, you know, he's so adamantly against him. It really characterizes Jefferson in this. I also really love Cabinet Battle 1, because it's epic rap battles of history. I love it.
Yeah, both of them are good.
And Nonstop is my favorite ensemble piece. My least favorite, Your Obedient Servant. I just, that's a nothing song. I get what it's doing. But like, everything that came before it, like Election of 1800, you know, like it serves a purpose, but this is just like, they're letters to each other, and it's not even like angry, it's just meh.
It's passive aggressive.
It's like them being passively aggressive to each other, basically.
Yeah, so like I'm gonna say no to that. But there's so many good songs. Like, we've gone for more than 3.5 hours at this point, and like, I wish I could say more about this play, because like there's so many good things, but there's not enough time. It's getting late. There's a couple of things that I want to do to end us off on. So when this was added to Disney Plus, Disney picked up Lin-Manuel as kind of their poster boy. As you've probably seen in recent stuff, like he did all the songs for Encanto, he did songs for Moana. He, for longest time, was very much pushed by Disney, and I love Lin's style, but there was some backlash even with like some with Moana, but even with Encanto. Like one of the biggest things was like Encanto during surface pressure, people are like, oh, like one of the biggest criticisms I've seen was from Todd in the Shadows, where he's like criticizing, was Hercules ever like, yo, I don't want to fight Cerberus? It's like, no, Hercules was never like, yo, I don't want to fight Cerberus. And I'm like, you're missing the point.
Yeah, I saw that review, and that kind of pissed me off too, especially since he put that on like the worst list above other songs that I've listened to that are clearly far worse than that song. So I don't blame you with like being totally aggravated with him over that. I was half tempted to angry tweet at him over that.
Like, I don't doubt that he's a good guy. I haven't spoken to him very much, but I'm friends with a lot of the people that, you know, were around at that time who know him. I think he's a decent guy, but he has a tendency to go off the rails with some of his points. And the problem is a lot of people took this as gospel, and I kept hearing it repeated. And it's like, you know, like the people started turning on the stylization of Lin's music. And it's like, the whole point is to put you in the shoes of a layman in this thing. It's not supposed to literally be construed this way. You know what I'm saying? It's a metaphor. A metaphor.
Right.
Right over your head. But yeah, so like there's been like a declining thing for Lin ever since then, and it feels like he hasn't recovered from. I think it was a mistake to put him in The Little Mermaid. I definitely do, because like he flew way too close to the sun with some of those songs. He clashed with a lot of it, but I think he just gets a lot of hate where he doesn't deserve it, where people still act like he's trying to tell realistic versions of these stories, and he's not. He's telling stylizations, things to get you into the shoes and really understand these characters. And that's the point. And unfortunately, there's been so much backlash that I don't know if that's going to affect him going forward. Doug?
Yeah, blathering blatherskite, man. What you call it? Just... Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard that much backlash aside from what we've, you know, just discussed with Todd in the Shadows. But it's like, yeah, I don't quite... Like, I understand if you don't like the music, if you're not a fan of that style. It's like, you certainly have your right and, you know, to pick apart certain things. But yeah, like you said, the, you know, surface pressure song... You're missing the point of the song, which honestly, like if you're, you know, an older sibling, or if you're, you know, somebody who basically like is, you know, having a bunch of stuff dumped on you constantly, and it's like you're expected to maintain, you know, a certain demeanor or whatever. It's like, yeah, that stuff is gonna weigh on you and weigh on you. It doesn't even matter if you have, you know, superhuman strength. It's like it's getting at you from an internal level. But you know, that's a different review. Yeah, I mean, obviously we've all, you know, kind of bashed on you know, the scuttlebutt from Little Mermaid, but let's face it,
Remember the swamp?
it's just like the Disney live action remakes are where creativity kind of goes to die, if there even is any. I mean, not to say that all the remakes haven't had some sort of creativity to them, but generally the whimsy is lost. But yeah, aside from that, like I said, I can't really say that I've heard any hate, any sort of vitriol toward Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I mean, let's face it, it's like to put him in that one place in Little Mermaid, it's not really fair, because it's already an existing thing, and he just put in like this one song, and if you don't like it, you don't like it.
Cat.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I think more of the hate is attributed to overexposure of his works and his other works not fitting into already established works, like Little Mermaid. I think another part of it too is people are worried about his influence over newer projects, because his style was like so big, so popular. Obviously, others are going to try to replicate it, and they in turn are going to oversaturate the market with his style. Like, for instance, I heard a part of the big reason why Wish was so frowned upon. I mean, not just the fact that it's implied that they used AI to make, the music and whatever, but they're saying that the creators who did the music were influenced by Miranda's style. And you can kind of tell with some of the songs because they try to insert the rap style to the point where it's basically word vomit. And I mean, can you really remember any of the songs, besides from, So I Make This Wish and the Villain song? You can't, because there's it's so jammed full of lyrics, it's hard to really sing them, really get into them. And it's clear that there was no thought process or style put into it per se. Some of them are slightly different and are better for it, but it's easy to see how some people would listen to this and think, oh, well, they're just trying to copy Lin-Manuel Miranda. We're about to get another pseudo-rap movie with all these songs and junk. So I can sort of see it in that sense, but again, like I said, I still think it's highly unwarranted why he's getting this hate, and it's more likely it's just from the older generation, from the racists and people who just like to hate on things because it's popular. That pretty much to me is what it all comes down to, and I think this Lin probably just needs a break at this point. Take a cue from his character in Hamilton. Just take a brief break, reevaluate, let yourself, have time to think of your next big project and not let Disney bully him into, doing everything under the sun. And I get it's tempting, especially when it's Disney backing you, they're waving those big Disney bucks around, but sometimes you just gotta pull back a little bit. And I get it's considered suicide in terms of Hollywood careers, because you don't want to disappear from the public eye too long, and just being gone a month is like being gone a year. But I don't know, I feel like at this point it would do him some good just to step away just for a little bit.
I can definitely agree with that. And to add to your point, I mean, I saw some hate even during Hamilton's initial release, where people were trying to cancel him on Twitter for nothing. So I don't know specifically why people are bashing. I think it's a mix of a lot of different things.
Well, part of that is because of the former president making a big stink about his play, and his supporters wanting to hashtag boycott, even though by that point his show had already been sold out for a few years. So
you couldn't get into the play. It's you're not going to boycott it. I'm not boycotting. I can't
exactly.
Get into the play.
Yeah, can we talk about that for a second? I mean, I don't want to get too political, but I know that whole thing was Mike Pence, the former vice president, went to see the show, and the cast directly addressed him, and they were just saying, hey, we don't want to cause a fight, but hey, realize that what you're doing is, potentially hurting us. We just want to be equal. And the Republicans basically took that as an attack on them.
Yeah. So that explains a little bit more now that I'm remembering things. It's been ever since 2016, this near decade, it has felt 50 years.
No, trust me. Even you saying it's been nearly 10 years since the show premiered, it feels 10 years since it premiered on Disney Plus to me. That's like the passage of time at this point. So like to hear that some people are still ragging on it because of that, it's just it's like baffling to me. It's like, dude, it was like that many years ago. Oh wait, no, it wasn't.
With that being said, I wish Lin the best. I think he should take a break and move to future things, but I think that he's fantastic, and I love Moana. It spoke to me in a very big way, as did Encanto, as did this play. With that being said, I am Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of ghost buns.
I am Kat McBerry.
I'm Doug. Wait for it. McBerry.
And we're going to sign off with this message. I may not live to see our glory.
I may not live to see our glory.
But I'll gladly join the fight.
But I will gladly join the fight.
But when our children tell our story,
Children tell our story.
they'll tell the story of tonight.
Let's raise another round tonight.
Let's raise another round tonight.
Let's raise another round tonight. Have a good one, everybody. Happy 100th Disney debate. Peace out.
To 100 more.